I never thought I'd find myself in this situation, the kind of dilemma people share online with that dreaded "am I the asshole?" tag, but here I am, sitting at my kitchen table, staring down at an empty plate while my kids are out with their dad. It wasn't always like this. 4 years ago, when the divorce was fresh, I believed we would make co-parenting work seamlessly, share everything, communicate effectively. But reality is rarely so tidy. The kids are still adjusting, they're 10 and 8, and between soccer practice, school events, and their dad's weekend adventures, I'm always trying to figure out how best to keep their lives stable. Then came the incident last week when he decided to lay down some new rules. No more video games during the week, he told me, as if he was handing down a decree from on high. I watched my son, Jack, crush his disappointment, the seismic shift in his little body palpable, while Lily, sweet and earnest, tried to negotiate, her big eyes glimmering with hope. "But Dad, what about our homework breaks?" she whispered, as if reasoning with gravity. My ex simply shrugged, his way or the highway, and walked out, leaving me to deal with their fallout. My instinct was to comfort them, to explain that their dad just wanted to be responsible and that they would adjust, but part of me wondered if his expectations were fair. Later that week, I made the decision to send them to his place instead of confront him directly or enforce rules I didn't fully agree with. I figured, maybe he could lighten the burden, let him implement his own decisions without me acting as the buffer. But as soon as I drove away, a wave of guilt washed over me. Was I really giving my kids the best shot at a balanced upbringing, or was I dodging my responsibility as a parent? My phone dinged a few hours later with a text from their dad, laced with irritation. "Nice of you to send them over without discussing it first." I stared at the screen and felt a ball of anxiety tighten in my throat. Despite his tone, I had hoped he might realize that I wasn't there to undermine him but to let him take the lead, something I thought he'd appreciate. But instead, all I felt was the familiar pang of fear that I was failing. What if I was just being lazy, avoiding the hard conversations we needed to have about co-parenting? Later that night, while I tucked the kids into bed, I saw what I feared most, Jack's little face crumpled up, confused over why he had to choose between Dad's rules and fun. I tried my best to comfort him, but I could sense the distance growing between us, as if the uncertainty I felt was infecting him, too. "Why can't we just have fun and it be okay?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, and it broke something inside me. What was I teaching them? That it was acceptable to pass the buck? That parenting was something to avoid? A part of me wanted to fight back and explain how harsh it could feel sometimes, yet another part feared pushing my ex further away, resulting in even more tension between us. I ended up lying awake, the weight of my choices pressing against my chest, unable to shake off the feeling that I might just be setting them up for confusion rather than a permanent solution. Days later, I received a text from my ex. He suggested a family meeting over pizza, which felt like a small olive branch, but I held my breath. It was the same dilemma looming over our heads, but it felt different now, more like a negotiation of emotional stakes than a black and white situation. Could we really move toward understanding each other's perspectives? Or were we destined to trip through mutual resentment? I still don't know how the meeting will go or if I'm the one creating divisiveness, but sitting at my table, I know it's critical to address our doubts. In the end, co-parenting might just be life's grandest mess, and I have to find a way to embrace that chaos for my kids' sake, even if it means controlling my guilt in the process. I hope to approach this journey not as two frazzled parents pulling apart but as a team willing to push through the discomfort for the sake of those innocent little faces, learning together along the way. I take a deep breath, feeling the weight of my thoughts settle on my chest like a thick blanket. The kids are at school, it's just me and the ticking clock echoing in the kitchen, reminding me of the time slipping away before this meeting with Jake. We've had our share of heated discussions, arguments flaring up like fireworks, especially when it came to our different styles of parenting. I often find myself reminiscing about the early days, before everything unraveled and the smiles faded like summer sunsets. Back then, we were a cohesive unit, a duo navigating life together. Now, it feels like we're two ships passing in the night, armed with resentment and frustration instead of compassion. I'm expecting him to come in guns blazing, ready to discuss a recent weekend incident where, in his eyes, I overstepped by allowing our kids to skip their bedtime to watch a movie. He always believed in strict routines, while I thought there was beauty in spontaneity, that sometimes we needed to let go and allow for those unplanned moments that could light up our children's eyes in ways a schedule never could. As I pour myself a cup of coffee, I wonder if this is the day he'll finally understand that not every decision needs to be a binary choice, that maybe, just maybe, we can meet in the middle. The doorbell rings, and my heart races. It's showtime. I open the door, and Jake stands there, hands shoved deep in his pockets, a slight crease lining his brow, a clear sign that today won't be easy. "Hey," he says, his voice even, albeit laced with tension. I can tell we're both straddling a tightrope of unspoken words. "Hi," I reply, trying to inject some warmth into the air, but it feels like I'm pushing against a brick wall. We settle at the table, the same one where we once celebrated birthdays and anniversaries, now a battleground for our parental philosophies. "Let's just get this over with," he says, a hint of exhaustion in his already weary tone. I nod, swallowing my pride, yet desperate to convey that my intention is not to undermine him but to seek a solution that serves the kids instead. As we dive into the conversation, I explain my perspective, emphasizing that those moments of joy, like movie nights, are precious. But they need structure, Michelle, Jake counters, running a hand through his hair, a move I recognize as one of frustration. "I get that," I reply softly, "but we can blend both. They can experience the joy of spontaneity and still have a routine." The tension crackles between us, an undeniable force that seems to be lifting us farther apart rather than bringing us together. But as the conversation flows, I start to catch glimpses of understanding breaking through his resolve. "I just want what's best for them," he finally admits, his voice dropping to a softer tone, vulnerability creeping in. There's a flash of something in his eyes, a flicker of the man I once loved, now buried beneath layers of hurt and anger. I want to reach out and tell him that I want the same, that we're on the same team, even if the landscape of our relationship looks rocky. We don't solve all our problems in that moment, but we find a tentative agreement to communicate better and be more flexible with the kids' needs, interspersed with laughter as we reminisce about our adventures as parents, the things we learned along the way. It's not a perfect resolution, but there's a sense of clarity, a first step taken amidst the chaos. Days pass, and I notice not only the kids adapting but also the shift in our interactions, slowly morphing from tactical maneuvers in the chess game of co-parenting to more fluid collaboration, joint parenting strategies forming organically. There's still awkwardness, but each exchange feels like another layer peeling away. I find small delights in the way our conversations start to shift from contentious to constructive, almost playful. One afternoon, we're out for ice cream with the kids, and I catch Jake stealing glances at me, a smile breaking across his face as our daughter stumbles over a joke, her laughter ringing out like music. I can't help but wonder if maybe, just maybe, we're onto something here. As I watch him lean down to share a secret with our son, a shadow of our shared past floats above us, and I grasp tightly onto that flicker of hope. And yes, it's messy, and sometimes I still doubt if I'm making the right choices, but I also see that both Jake and I are evolving, laying a foundation I never expected to build again. This journey is still evolving, and in embracing the chaos, we might just find a bit of harmony after all. As we pile back into the car, the kids chattering away, I know it's not about erasing the past, but about forging ahead together, and for their sake, I'm willing to keep trying. The car hums softly as I turn the key in the ignition, a familiar routine that now feels like a sweet promise rather than a burden. The kids' voices blend into a joyful symphony behind me, filled with anecdotes about school, art projects, and their latest obsessions with superheroes. Ruby, my youngest, is still that vibrant bundle of energy, her laughter bouncing off the window as she enthusiastically reenacts some cartoon character. Max, ever the quieter one, joins in with his own, quieter enthusiasm, spinning elaborate tales about the cosmic adventures he imagines. As I glance at their faces in the rearview mirror, I can't help but feel the warmth radiating from their innocence. This moment, their laughter, the chaos, even the perpetual mess of snack crumbs and toys, is what I clung to during the hollow moments post-divorce. Jake and I may have our differences, but what remains steadfast is our shared priority, these kids. My heart beats a little harder, knowing we're creating a shared narrative, writing our story word by word even amidst the noise. But then, the undercurrent of anxiety twists in my stomach again as I consider the upcoming family meeting, our first sit-down since our awkward attempts at blending our parenting styles. I had even suggested bringing in a mediator, believing that a neutral third party could help us navigate the rocky waters of our new reality without drowning in resentment. Honestly, I felt like a ship tossed in stormy seas, unsure of whether I'd find safe harbor or capsize under the weight of our past. "Mom, look at this." Ruby suddenly squeals, waving a crumpled piece of paper mid-performance. It's her drawing, a colorful explosion on the page that vaguely reminds me of a rainbow, yet definitely carries all the chaos I might feel inside. This is you and Daddy fighting the evil robots. I chuckle lightly, the image surreal yet kind, reminding me that somehow, even in our most contentious moments, those little faces still find a way to make sense of things. And do we win? I ask playfully, hoping to inspire a solution rather than digging deeper into the abyss of disagreements. Of course. You always win, Mom. She beams with confidence, solidifying the sense of heroism I sometimes feel falling flat in those tense moments with Jake. It's a fleeting reassurance, but it's enough to allow me some clarity. Maybe winning isn't even the point. The thought lingers, heavy but enlightening, as we pull into our driveway, with its friendly chaos of toys left behind from a previous playdate. As we step inside, I can almost see the ghosts of arguments past lingering in the air, yet there's also the comforting aroma of our evening routine, the smell of something simmering on the stove, the scattered shoes and backpacks as evidence of busyness. This is our refuge, a home built on love, tension, and the messiness of family life. After dinner, I caught Jake on a rare day when he'd swung by to help me set up for the meeting. I noticed the way he hesitated, taking everything in, as if he were expecting me to lay a landmine somewhere between us. Instead, with all the courage I could muster, I suggested we work on a joint agenda to present to the mediator. This felt like an attempt to heal wounds, to find some middle ground, a step into a shared realm rather than one wrought with individual agendas. So, what's important to you? He asked after a long, thoughtful pause. My heart raced, not from the administrative task at hand but from the raw vulnerability of really addressing what we both sought to accomplish. I could easily slide into bitterness, hash out the past mistakes and newfound tensions. Instead, I chose to share my fear of the kids feeling caught in our storm. I want them to feel safe, I admitted, my voice a whisper dipped in emotion. We were in this together now, and I realized how fundamental it was to set aside old grudges to collaborate toward ensuring they didn't feel like pawns in our unraveling. It felt liberating with just the energy in the room shifting, even if it was only a crack in the ice we both had skated on for too long. With the meeting looming, a flicker of hope ignites again. I can almost breathe in the possibility of redemption. That night, as I stumbled into the quiet of my bedroom, the laughter of the kids fading into soft echoes, I knew the path ahead would remain jagged. Yet, in the chaos and uncertainty of co-parenting, I could finally see we were capable of more than I believed. And perhaps, just perhaps, we would carve our own way, one shared drawing, one awkward discussion, one messy dinner at a time. When my 15-year-old daughter, Ava, first came to me with that furrowed brow and almost conspiratorial tone, I knew this wasn't going to be a typical "can we order pizza for dinner" conversation. She was scrolling through her phone, tapping the screen as if the device held the answers to life's most pressing questions. "Mom, you remember Karen from school? The one with the weird lunchbox obsession?" I chuckled, that visual of Karen's floral patterned lunch pail making me smile. "Of course. What about her?" Ava bit her lip, glancing sideways as if she feared someone might overhear us. I took a seat next to her on the couch, concerned but trying to maintain an air of casual curiosity. "Well, she said her mom gets into their group chat and reads everything they talk about. Is that normal?" The question landed with a weight I hadn't expected. I felt a rush of emotions, protectiveness, confusion, indignation. "That doesn't seem right, sweetie," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Ava's eyes sparkled with relief, but I could see the worry churning behind them. "Do you really think it's weird?" she pressed, and I knew she was grappling with her allegiance to a friend versus her instinct to be kind. "I mean, if these girls can't even speak freely in their own chat, what's the point?" I gestured vaguely, struggling to put my thoughts into words. "I get that parents want to protect their kids, but reading their conversations? That feels invasive." Ava nodded, her shoulders relaxing a bit, but doubt lingered in her gaze. The more we talked, the more I could sense the bond between Ava and her friends was rooted in trust, something that this other mom was potentially undermining. We spent the afternoon discussing the nuances of friendships and boundaries, each point of conversation fueling my desire to protect my daughter while also helping her navigate this new social landscape. Yet, things grew tense when I decided to express my thoughts to Ava about how I felt Karen's mom was crossing a line. What if Mrs. Thompson finds something embarrassing? Or uses it against them later? I said, the words swallowing the air between us. But just then, Ava's face twisted into one of apprehension, and she said something that made my heart clench. "But what if she's just trying to be safe, Mom?" I could feel the pendulum of my parenting philosophy swinging. Was I being too harsh? Too aggressive in my stance against someone who might actually be trying to look out for her daughter? As our discussion continued, a nagging voice in the back of my head whispered that I might be a bit too protective, but deep down, I just couldn't shake the feeling that the trust between girls was being eroded by that thin screen of parental oversight. My heart was worn from this emotional tug-of-war, balancing between supporting comfort and advocating for separation. In the coming weeks, Ava decided to share her thoughts with Karen, but that confrontation didn't end well. I could see the stress gnawing at my daughter, somewhere between the line she wanted to walk as a good friend and the line I thought was essential to take as a protector. When their friendship seemed to wane, with Karen taking it to a new level of loyalty to her mom, Ava became frustrated and hurt, returning to me with her eyes brimming with unshed tears. I hugged her, rubbing her back softly, forcing myself to set aside my anxiety about Karen's home life. "You're not responsible for their choices," I said. "But you can always choose to do what feels right for you." Slowly, I watched as she emerged from that cocoon of unease, taking ownership of her feelings and distancing herself from the unhealthy dynamics. Then I grew even more bewildered when Mrs. Thompson texted me a week later. I could almost hear the smugness radiating through her words as she asked if I would like to talk about our daughter's friendship. I took a moment to breathe, staring at the text on my phone, heart racing as I contemplated what sort of conversation was about to ensue. And as I teetered at the edge of familiarity and unease, I felt that surge of protective energy rise, breeding uncertainty in my own thoughts. As the days unfolded, I eventually responded but could not shake the thought of how easily the world of social media can turn even the simplest of friendships into a battleground for trust and loyalty, wondering if everything we once cherished about growing up together was now battered by screens. I'm still pondering that lunchbox scenario and how, in a world where connection should build kids up, it sometimes seems to cripple them with distrust, leaving me caught between the expectations of a good friend and a watchful mother. Maybe I'm justified in thinking the mom is overstepping, or perhaps I'm simply going to be judged as the overprotective parent. Who really knows? But there's one thing I've learned: navigating the painful waters of adolescence is no easy feat, and daughters need to feel heard, not just as children in my eyes, but as young women finding their place in a complicated world. I took a deep breath, the scent of fresh cut grass wafting through the open kitchen window, a stark contrast to the swirling thoughts in my mind. I watched my daughter, Lily, sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by her colorful art supplies, her brow furrowed as she painstakingly crafted something out of paper and glue. Every piece she created was a glimpse into her inner world, and I feared that whatever she sensed about her friend's mom might dim that vibrant spark if she felt I wasn't on her side. "Mom?" Lily's voice broke through my reverie, startling me back into the moment. "Can we take a break? I'm feeling sort of weird." There it was again, that word. I set down my coffee and sat beside her, the warmth of her small frame pressing against me. "Weird like what?" I asked gently, trying to mask my own unease. "Weird like, how can Mrs. Thompson see what I'm saying too? Julia?" She didn't meet my eyes, clearly wrestling with the heavy thoughts behind her youthful gaze. "It's like, it's not just happens, you know? Like, I feel like I can't say, like, anything without her reading it. It's just weird." I felt a pang of protectiveness and pride wash over me at her articulation. It was one of those moments where you realize your child is becoming more than just your little girl. She's a thinker, a person shaped by her experiences. "You're not crazy for feeling that way, Lily," I said softly, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "It's okay to want privacy. It's okay to think it's weird." But even as the words left my mouth, a flicker of doubt ignited within me. Was I feeding into something that might later just amplify her insecurities? What if your friend's mom just wants to keep her safe? I asked, trying to present both sides, but I could hear the hesitation in my own tone. "That doesn't mean she can't trust us," Lily replied assertively, her eyes finally locking onto mine. "It feels like she thinks we're kids who can't handle stuff ourselves." There it was, the essence of her turmoil, a tangle of trust and reliance on friendship that felt too heavy for her small shoulders. I could sense the confusion radiating from her, and it twisted my stomach like a pretzel. I remembered how I'd always felt like I had to earn my independence from my own parents, how every safety net often felt like a straitjacket. But did that make me the bad guy if I stood firm in supporting her feelings? "Do you want to talk to her?" I offered, though fear crept in, imagining how that conversation would unfold. "Like, get her to tell Mrs. Thompson that she's weirded out?" I finished for her, smiling despite the tension. "Yeah, kinda." The laughter vanished as quickly as it had arrived, and uncertainty took its place. Maybe we should talk, just the two of us, I suggested lightly. Let's figure this out together. A determined look crossed Lily's face, her little chin jutting out in a way that reminded me far too much of myself. We dove into a conversation about boundaries, respect, and what it meant to communicate with support instead of judgment. It was refreshing and occasionally painful as the truth emerged. I realized that while I feared the overstepping of others, I also needed to make sure that I didn't suffocate her with my instinctual desire to shield her from everything. Together, we navigated it all, her comfort with what she wanted to say to Julia, a response that felt empowering, that reinforced her independence while still letting her know I had her back. After a few fidgety moments of brainstorming, she finally scribbled something down. "Hey, I feel funny about Mrs. Thompson reading our chats. Can you just ask her?" Just then, a certain sense of ease washed over me. The hard discussions create better dialogue, spacing in the struggle of raising a child who will someday be an adult. It wasn't perfect, but it felt right to let her lead the conversation when it came to matters so close to her heart. In the days that followed, I kept an eye on Lily during her interactions with Julia, hoping she would find the strength to voice her feelings. I learned that sometimes being a support means just standing back and watching, trusting that she would figure out her path, confident as she spreads her wings. Then, one afternoon, after feedback from Julia that seemed to empower her, Lily bounded into the house with a beaming smile. "You know what? We talked to Mrs. Thompson," she said, nearly jumping with pride. "And guess what? She apologized and said she didn't mean to make us uncomfortable. We can friend chat without her snooping." I felt a flood of relief crashing through me at her words, but somewhere, beneath that joy, I was fully aware that this wouldn't be the last battle she faced. This journey was just beginning, one filled with hurdles, lessons, and maybe some minor catastrophes along the way. But if she could open herself to conversation, if I could help her learn to navigate her emotions, then maybe we both would come out stronger on the other side. And in this tangled, beautiful mess of adolescence, perhaps I wouldn't be the antagonist, just another parent, doing my best, together. That afternoon, I sat at the kitchen table, the open window letting in a gentle breeze, carrying with it the scent of blooming lilacs from our backyard. My daughter, Mia, was busily assembling her homework, papers strewn across the table, colored pens creating a small rainbow of doodles surrounding an unfinished math worksheet. I watched her work, occasionally glancing up at her with a sense of pride mixed with the lingering worry that had settled like a stone in my stomach. I had fought back tears earlier when she had finally opened up about her friend Sophia's mom and her invasive messages, but seeing Mia engrossed in her assignments now made me realize just how vital these moments of trust and connection were. "Hey, Mia," I finally said softly, shifting the dynamics in our busy little space. "You know I'm always here to talk, right?" She looked up, her eyes focused and clear, even if the small furrow in her brow suggested she was still digesting our earlier conversation. "Yeah, I know," she replied, her voice a little tentative. "But I don't want to be that kid whose mom is always breathing down her neck." There it was, her adolescent anxiety surfacing again, and just like that, layers of complexity deepened my understanding of her world. I took a breath, letting my words flow out with as much clarity and kindness as I could muster. "I get that. I don't want to be that parent either. The world's big and a little scary sometimes. We need each other's backs more than ever now." She nodded slowly, absorbing my words. Then her focus shifted to her phone on the table, a faint shadow crossing her forehead. "But my friends think I'm a freak for thinking it's weird that Sophia's mom goes through our chats. It feels like, I don't know. It's like no one cares about boundaries." The ache in my heart twinged again, knowing how peer pressure can sometimes loom larger than any parent's voice. "Well, boundaries matter, sweetheart. They help define us. It's okay to feel unsettled about it. It just feels so unfair." Her voice cracked slightly, revealing an unexpected emotional vulnerability. "Like, how do I say something without sounding ungrateful? I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings." We were treading on complex ground, this landscape of friendship mixed with loyalty, respect, and the innocent desire for connection. I remembered my own childhood, the swirl of emotions, confusion stemming from wanting to fit in, yet feeling lost in the process. You know, sometimes it's hard. Standing up for yourself can feel lonely, and that's okay. But your feelings are real, and they deserve to be expressed. The sincerity in my voice seemed to spark something in her. Mia began to speak, her chatter weaving in and out like the gentle breeze outside, filled with vibrant stories about her friends, about school, and how complicated it felt when everyone had opinions about everything. As she spoke, I saw her world slowly transform into colors, imagery that reflected what her heart had been silently wrestling with all along. After a while, I set the dishes aside, and we fell into a comfortable silence, the kind that felt shared rather than empty. It was then that the reality of our conversation resurfaced. "Do you think I should talk to Sophia directly about it?" she asked, her voice betraying an uncertain hope. I let the question hang for a moment, nudging aside my protective instincts. "Only if you feel ready, Mia. Approach it with honesty. You're not trying to hurt her, it's your boundary. And if she respects you, it'll strengthen your friendship." That small ember of reassurance lit up her expression, and I could almost see the gears quietly turning in her mind, testing this new approach. Just as I was about to say something further, my phone buzzed on the table, pulling me back to reality. It was a message from Mia's school about their upcoming social studies project. "Right when you're finding your voice," I mused aloud, "more chaos. Isn't that always the way?" She laughed, the kind of chain reaction laughter that felt like a release. "Welcome to my life." As I watched her dive back into her assignments, I felt waves of optimism crashing against the rocks of that fear I had been grappling with. Perhaps it was silly to think that every conversation would solve every problem. But we were in this together, just a pair of players in the chaotic game of life, navigating through the highs and lows. The world was indeed filled with hurdles, but as long as we kept talking, even when fear made it hard, I knew we'd emerge okay, together, every step of the way. Over the days and weeks that followed, Mia did muster the courage to approach Sophia, and while it wasn't perfect, it opened avenues for dialogue that surprised both of them. I felt some weight ease off my shoulders as I realized, this journey of parenting isn't about perfection, it's about presence, being there for each other as we navigate life together. And maybe, just maybe, my voice wouldn't be an impediment, it would be the bridge through the messiness of growing up. I never thought my child's third birthday party would turn into a battleground for family loyalty, but here we are, and I suppose I should have seen it coming. Ever since I got married to Max, it felt like I stepped into an episode of a reality show, his family always hovering in the background, ready to weigh in on every little thing we did. From the names we picked for our kids to what we served for Thanksgiving dinner, there was always some kind of criticism, but nothing could have prepared me for the bombshell that came the day they called my daughter a mistake. I remember it so clearly. It was a Saturday afternoon, and Max had invited his parents over to discuss our plans for Mara's birthday. They'd been hinting for weeks about a big family celebration, but as we sat around our tiny kitchen table, the conversation took a harsh turn. Someone mentioned how it was so commendable of us to have a child after what they deemed a rushed marriage. The words hung heavy in the air like a thick fog, and then, like some sick twist of fate, his mother chimed in, "Well, at least Mara wasn't an oops. What a lovely mistake she could have been." I could feel my stomach drop, like I'd been punched in the gut. The room went silent except for the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. Max's eyes widened in surprise, then quickly shifted to mine, searching for my reaction. I could feel my face blazing hot, and all I could think was, how could they say that about our daughter? I took a deep breath, forcing myself to calm down. I hadn't expected this utter disregard for Mara's existence from people who claimed to love her. That was it for me. I decided then and there they wouldn't be invited to the party. And soon, the tension began to simmer beneath the surface at home, even as I came up with a smaller, more intimate celebration, inviting just my parents and a few close friends. Max was torn. He wanted to keep the peace with his family. "It's just one party," he said, his voice low and hesitant. But for me, it was so much more than that. I didn't want to celebrate our child's life in the presence of people who believed she was anything less than a miracle. A week later, as the day approached, I could see the disappointment etched in Max's face, and it hurt me more than I expected. I felt guilty, like I was drawing a line in the sand and forcing him to choose between his family and our daughter. But how could I compromise on our child's self-worth? The day of the party, our apartment was bright and cheerful, adorned with colorful balloons and little decorations that I had put up with care. As I watched Mara laugh and play, completely oblivious to the chaos surrounding her lineage, my heart swelled. I had made the right call, I felt it in my bones. But that night, after Mara was tucked in bed, Max laid beside me in silence, tension building like a tightrope waiting to snap. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "They're my family, you know. I wish you could just see things from their perspective." I turned to face him, my heart aching. But they are not considering her perspective. She deserves to feel wanted and loved, and they showed me that they're not capable of that. It felt like a rift that opened up between us, one that was born from love but was fueled by pain and misunderstanding. I wanted to scream, to shake him into understanding my point of view, but all I could do was whisper back, "I'm sorry, Max. I can't pretend that their words didn't hurt. And I can't believe they deserve a front row seat to her life." In the weeks that followed, conversations became more strained. I noticed Max's absence during Mara's bedtime stories, his mind clearly elsewhere as he wrestled with unspoken loyalties. Part of me wished I could send a message to his parents, to boldly let them know how their words affected me, how deeply they cut into Mara's innocence. But the other part of me recognized that family dynamics are messy and complicated, often filled with an intricate web of expectancies. I felt lost, uncertain if I did the right thing or truly created an even bigger problem. A few months passed, and I noticed some shifts. Max started standing up for us more. He wouldn't answer every call from his parents, learned to set boundaries that had never been there before. I hoped he was realizing that family is more than blood, it's about respect and love. Some days I still wonder about that invitation I didn't send and how it might have changed the dynamics. We're a family of our own now, and I need to believe we're strong enough to weather any storm, as long as we can shield Mara from any hurtful words. It's an ongoing journey, one filled with bumps and roadblocks, but each day seems to get a bit clearer. Among the chaos, I found something resembling peace, a conviction that my daughter deserves only the most loving, encouraging voices in her life, even if it means disappointing those who can't see her worth. As I lay in bed, I realized that I might not have invited them for this birthday, but I still hope that one day, they may come to understand just how important Mara is, not just to me, but to them too. As I lay in bed, that weighty silence pressing around me, I felt the soft rise and fall of my daughter's breath in the next room. Every small, rhythmic sigh brought me back to the moment we had first brought her home. The world had been so bright and new, I remember cradling her tiny form, whispering promises that I'd always protect her. Yet here I was, days away from her 6th birthday, grappling with the collision of love and hurt. I could still hear the expression on Simon's mother's face when she callously referred to Mara, a slip of the tongue that cut deeper than I think anyone realized. She was a mistake, she had said, her voice dripping with disdain. I sat there, frozen, my heart racing as her words echoed around the table, bouncing between Simon and me, thickening the air until it felt suffocating. We had been discussing the party arrangements, planning a simple backyard gathering with balloons, cake, and giggles. But that day, the festivities turned sour. I had planned on inviting his family, a gesture of goodwill, a way to show Mara that she belongs in this larger family picture. But I couldn't shake that cruel labeling, it festered like an open wound. In Simon's eyes, I saw the confusion morph into fury, his hands clenched into fists on the table, and I felt torn, an invisible tether connecting my love for him and my fierce protection of Mara. Maybe that's when I truly understood, like some slivers of light filtering through clouds, that I had to draw a line. I didn't write the invitations, I couldn't bear the thought of watching his family walk through our front door, smiling, hands outstretched, blissfully unaware of the pain they had hurled at us with such careless ease. I wanted my daughter to feel cherished in all her glorious imperfections, to celebrate the little joys of life without a looming shadow of resentment. Even if it meant disappointing Simon, who believed that family bonds could weather storms, I clung to the notion that Mara's well-being trumped all else. The days ticked down to the party, each passing hour wrought with a heavy uncertainty. Thoughts spiraled like leaves in a whirlwind. What if Simon's family never saw beyond that mistake? What if they became permanent whispers in Mara's ears? I longed to wrap her in a bubble of joy, where only kind words and laughter seeped through. On the eve of her birthday, I set up in the backyard, transforming it into a wonderland. Brightly colored banners waved in the gentle breeze, and the aroma of freshly baked cupcakes lingered in the air. Mara awoke the next morning with a delighted squeal, her eyes sparkling with the promise of adventure. As she bounced through the house, I couldn't help but smile. I had chosen love, had crafted a day where she could simply be a kid, wrapped in the simple joys of friendship, adventures, and her favorite unicorn balloons. When the guests arrived, friends from preschool, neighbors, and my own family, the atmosphere shifted, blooming with laughter and joy. I watched as they tossed confetti and held Mara in their arms, inspecting the cake as if it were the most precious of treasures. Each smile sparked something within me, a flame igniting my heart. Simon arrived late, his expression a mixture of joy and perhaps a shadow of disappointment. After the guests left, he cornered me by the patio, frowning. "You know they're hurt you didn't invite them," he said, a hint of frustration edging his voice. I took a deep breath, reminding myself of that fierce protective instinct I had felt so strongly. I can't have them in our lives if that's how they see our daughter. She needs to know she's not a mistake, not to anyone. The silence expanded between us, a hesitation before release. Finally, after what felt like ages, he nodded quietly, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "I understand," he said, his voice softer now. I could see he was weighing the strands of love and obligation, questioning the dynamic of family ties. As the dusk settled, I held Mara in my arms again, her laughter echoing in sweet harmonies through the space between us. I had chosen this moment, this sacred time, to nourish what mattered most. Maybe the future would lead to reconciliation with his family, to a day when they'd see what a miracle our Mara truly is, but until then, I could live with the uncertainty. She would thrive in the warmth of acceptance, surrounded by those who valued her light, and that was enough for me. Love isn't always perfect, but it is a journey worth every choice made along the way. As I laid her down for the night, I stroked her hair and whispered into the stillness, "You are so loved, my sweet Mara. No mistakes here, only magic." And as I curled up beside her, I realized that sometimes, choosing peace over family ties can be an act of love too. The soft glow of the nightlight cast gentle shadows across the room, and the rhythmic sound of Mara's breathing was like a soothing lullaby, anchoring me in this moment of deep reflection. I had spent months wrestling with the decision to exclude my husband's family from our lives, especially during milestones that felt etched in stone like a birthday. On the surface, it should have been about balloons, laughter, and cake, but the words they had hurled at my precious daughter still echoed in my mind, sharp and unforgiving. "A mistake," they had said, as if she were a typographical error written in the generation before her, a phrase that had become an unwelcome anchor, dragging down my resolve and filling me with a quiet ache. I remembered the tight smiles plastered on faces that should have radiated joy on my wedding day, the strained conversations at family gatherings, where I felt like a puzzle piece that just wouldn't fit. But it was Mara's laughter, pure and innocent, that sparked a flicker of rebellion within me. I'd refused to let that laughter be tainted by their negativity. I wanted her to grow up enveloped in acceptance and love, not the brand of aloofness their cutting comments seemed to carry like a silent banner. As the nighttime shadows danced along the walls, my thoughts circled back to the upcoming party. I pictured all the faces of friends and loved ones who would uplift Mara, gleaming with encouragement and warmth, and I recognized that the absence of her grandparents and aunts was a sacrifice worth making, not just for her, but for my own spirit too. Yes, sacrificing those familial ties felt heavy, but it also felt like a reclamation of all that was sacred. I wanted to ensure that our space remained a sanctuary, one where no one was allowed to question her value, a fortress built from laughter and joy. As I hugged her to me, I flipped through memories of my own childhood filled with unconditional love. The thought that my daughter might walk a different path because of a cold family history sent a shiver through me. Yet everything in me screamed that she was not, nor would ever be, a mistake, and it was a lesson I wanted to impart in bold letters across her soul. In the days that followed, I worked tirelessly to plan her birthday celebration, the air buzzing with activity as I selected vibrant decorations, hand-picked her favorite treats, and invited the people who genuinely cherished us. Friends from the neighborhood, parents of her schoolmates, all of whom viewed her not as an afterthought but as the miracle she truly was. The day of the party unfolded like a fairy tale, filled with warmth, cheer, and an overwhelming sense of belonging. Mara twirled in her favorite dress, her laughter ringing out like a melody that fulfilled every corner of my heart. I felt pride swelling within me, a protective shield against any whispers of doubt. Yet, in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake off the silence that stemmed from my husband's family. I had chosen to sever ties, and while I stood listening to the jubilant chorus of children and adults celebrating, there lingered a slight shadow of regret. I wondered if one day I would be able to explain my choice to Mara without burdening her with the pain that had colored my decisions. Would her family ever come to understand the joy they had missed out on? I let those thoughts drift as the candles were lit, and I watched her make her wish. And in that moment, as she closed her eyes, I realized that love sometimes meant setting boundaries, even when they extended far beyond the people who raised you. With a soft smile, I tucked that lingering sadness away for another time, deciding that for now, the warmth of friendship would be enough. After all, in this new journey, I could see clearly that mistakes were only what we made them, and my daughter? She was a beautiful unblemished canvas, waiting to be painted with love and acceptance, not the scars of hurtful words. As the day closed, with laughter echoing through our home, it dawned on me that family, in all its forms, could still be a tapestry woven from heartstrings that stretched far and wide, even if some threads were lost along the way. I never imagined my life would turn into a reality show, and yet here I am, sitting on my porch with a cup of lukewarm coffee, replaying the whole mess in my head. You see, I share custody of my 2 kids, Clara and Jake, with their mother, Sophie. We navigated the stormy seas of divorce with a semblance of civility, or at least I thought we did. But when she informed me she was being deployed for 6 months, my heart dropped. Not because she was going away, this was her career after all, but because of what it meant for our kids. Sophie married Matt, a guy I've never really clicked with. He's a nice enough guy, sure, but there's something about him that makes me uneasy, especially when it comes to my kids. As deployment day approached, it became clearer that Matt would be the primary caretaker. I felt a knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach, especially after hearing some stories from friends about step-parents not being all they're cracked up to be. I had a chat with Sophie before the big day and the topic came up. She was oblivious to the little voice in my head telling me, "What if he's not a safe choice for your kids?" I mentioned my reservations, trying to tread lightly, but the look on her face made me feel like I had toppled a stack of fragile glassware. The conversation quickly turned into a heated debate. "He's their stepfather, he loves them just as much as you do," she had said, her voice rising. I tried to explain my perspective, but it felt like I was shouting into a whirlpool. When Sophie left for deployment, my anxiety only swelled. I finally had a heart-to-heart with myself and decided to reach out to her via text. "I can't let the kids stay with Matt while you're gone," I typed out, heart racing. I knew it was a bold statement, but I felt it was necessary. But the moment I hit send, I felt that familiar pit of doubt unearth itself. Did I cross a line? A few minutes later, my phone chimed, and her response was swift and vehement. "You can't just decide that without discussing it. He is their stepfather." I wanted to explain how uneasy I felt, but instead, I simply felt a wave of guilt wash over me. After what felt like an eternity of back and forth texts, I told her flat out that this wasn't about her, or even Matt, but my kids' safety and well-being. The silence that followed was deafening and uncomfortable. I hung up feeling like I had ignited a harsh storm. I thought about Clara and Jake. I could picture them standing there with us as Sophie packed her bags, tears pooling in their innocent eyes. I wanted to protect them, but was I truly the asshole for trying to create a better environment for their safety? We eventually settled on a temporary solution, where the kids would stay with my parents while Sophie was away. But the tension between Sophie and me took longer to ease. I still think about that day and wonder if I made the right call. Maybe I'm overprotective, or maybe deep down I just didn't trust Matt. Regardless, I'm still waiting for things to settle. It's hard to navigate the choppy waters of co-parenting when all anyone wants is peace. I guess I'll figure it out as we go along, one day at a time, hoping to find some clarity amidst the chaos. The weeks that followed were like a slow drip of rain, each day heavy with uncertainty. I kept rationalizing my decision, telling myself I was only acting in my children's best interest, but it felt different when I was alone with my thoughts at night. My parents had welcomed the kids with open arms, their house filled with laughter and the occasional squabble over toys, but every time I left them there, a knot would tighten in my stomach. I had spent years feeling like the steady, guiding hand, and handing that responsibility over, even temporarily, was daunting. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter one Thursday evening, pulling me from my reverie. It was a message from Sophie. My heart skipped. It had been a few days since we last spoke, and I didn't know what to expect. It read, "Can we talk?" That single sentence felt like a prelude to a storm. I knew it would lead to either a breakthrough or another wave of conflict. I hesitated for a moment, the screen lighting up my anxious face as I typed, "Sure, when?" After a few agonizing minutes, she replied, "I'm free after the kids' bedtime," which was just a few hours away. I spent those hours pacing my living room, running through countless scenarios in my head, silently rehearsing my lines, clutching at the fragile threads of our co-parenting arrangement. When the clock finally struck 8, I sat with my hands tightly wrapped around a mug of lukewarm tea, my heart thudding. The kids were happily lost in a story with my parents, and for the first time in weeks, the quiet felt like both a blessing and a curse. Sophie arrived just as the moon peeked through the clouds, casting an ethereal glow across the room. I motioned for her to sit, and there was an almost palpable tension in the air, thick enough that I could almost taste my apprehension. "Can we put everything on the table?" she started, her voice steady but laced with a subtle edge of frustration. I nodded, steeling myself for what was sure to be a tricky conversation. She spoke about her deployment, the fears and uncertainties she faced, not just with her job but the lingering anxiety about who was taking care of her kids while she was away. Matt, her husband, had been asking about when he could see them, and I could see how torn she was. She wanted to trust him, wanted to believe he could take care of the kids as well as she could, but I could hear the unspoken doubts in her words. "I just don't think he's ready," I said finally, feeling the heat rush to my cheeks. "He's only been part of their lives for a little while, and they're still adjusting. I can't just let them go without knowing they're safe." "That's what it comes down to, isn't it?" she replied, her voice rising slightly. "You don't trust him. You don't trust me." The accusation hung in the air, sharp and biting. I opened my mouth to respond but then closed it again, realizing that the truth was more complicated than that. It wasn't just distrust, it was coming from a place of love. My love for our kids made my instincts flare up like a wildfire. "I want what's best for them, Sophie," I finally said, words mostly clipped, the emotion backing them sending tremors through my chest. "But I've seen what can happen when things go wrong. What if he loses control? What if they don't feel safe? I just wanted to protect them." Her expression softened, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of understanding in her eyes. "I get it. I really do. But they need their dad, too, and I need space to know they're okay when I'm gone. Can't we find a way?" Suddenly, the walls of our conflict felt like they were shifting, and I found myself considering her plea through the lens of a mother's fear. Perhaps my stance was too rigid, too rooted in my own fears. "I'm willing to give him a chance, but we both need to establish boundaries and rules," I proposed, an inkling of compromise blossoming amidst the tension. As we talked, laying everything on the table, I started to envision a plan, one that we could both agree upon. It felt good to share the weight, and that heaviness lightened just a little. By the time we parted ways that night, I felt a cautious optimism. I still had my reservations about Matt, and perhaps that wasn't going to change overnight. But we had taken a step forward, and I clung to that. As I tucked myself into bed later, the moonlight lining my room with a silver glow, I felt a little more centered. I didn't know what the road ahead would look like, but I hoped that we could navigate it together. I fell asleep that night dreaming of balance, of co-parenting that resembled a dance, one careful step at a time, learning to trust the rhythm while keeping the safety of our children in mind. Days turned into weeks, and as Sophie's deployment drew closer, I was learning that compromise didn't signify weakness, it was a bridge toward understanding. As for an update, I'd say it's a work in progress. I still worry about Matt and keep communication open with Sophie. But every time I see my kids laughing and thriving, whether at my parents' house or during a brief visit with their dad, I understand that we're crafting a new kind of family, one rooted in collaboration and love. Maybe that's what peace really looks like for us, each day, each decision, building our way to a place where everyone feels safe. As Sophie's deployment drew closer, I was learning that compromise didn't signify weakness, it was a bridge toward understanding. As for an update, I'd say it's a work in progress. I still worry about Matt and keep communication open with Sophie. But every time I see my kids laughing and thriving, whether at my parents' house or during a brief visit with their dad, I understand that we're crafting a new kind of family, one rooted in collaboration and love. Maybe that's what peace really looks like for us, each day, each decision, building our way to a place where everyone feels safe. In those early weeks, I grappled with sleepless nights, rolling over to see the empty half of my bed, again. My thoughts circled like vultures, always settling back to Matt. I'd heard rumors about his past, how he wasn't just another face in the crowd, but a man who had stumbled through some shady days before cleaning up his act. I wanted to trust Sophie's judgment, but that nagging voice in the back of my mind made it difficult to unwind. One afternoon over coffee at our usual cafe, I shared my concerns with Sophie. She sat across from me, brow furrowed, and I could tell my worries were weighing on her heart. "You know, it's not easy for me either," she sighed, stirring her drink absent-mindedly. "I chose to be with Matt because I saw the good in him. I feel torn, really. But I'm the one in the middle." Her honesty, raw and tangible, made that barrier between us feel thinner for a moment. I wanted to assure her that I had her and the kids' best interests at heart, but the whole situation felt so convoluted. After a couple of weeks, the shifts began to show. The kids returned from Grandma's house animated, joy bubbling in their voices as they recapped the fishing trips with Grandpa and the story times that stretched late into the night. Even the way they lit up at the mention of their mom made me smile, at least they were secure in that love. But there was a shadow on the periphery when they mentioned how Matt had taken them hiking. I could feel my heart rate quicken. What had that outing entailed? One evening, I mustered up the courage to call him directly. Sophie had given me his number when I expressed my need for clarity. I wanted to get a sense of his intentions before the kids spent another weekend with him. As the phone rang, I felt a mix of anxiety and unexpected responsibility surge through my veins. "Hey, it's Jake," I said when he picked up. "Hey, man. What's up?" There was a casual ease in his voice that made me want to drown it out with 1,000 questions. Instead, I chose one. "I just wanted to check in about the kids." "Yeah, they're great. We had a blast hiking the other day. They've got energy for days." I could picture him, the smile stretched across his face, but I needed more than just enthusiasm. His joy felt almost superficial. "Look, can we be real here?" I went on, taking a leap. "I'm just trying to understand the boundaries here. Their safety is my priority, you know?" A silence hung between us, thickening the air like humidity before a storm. "Totally get it, man," he replied finally, his tone shifting slightly. "You don't have to worry. I care about your kids." With that, I felt a twinge of something, a glimmer of hope, maybe? Or was it just a trapdoor opening into more anxiety? Either way, I didn't want to dismiss that hint of sincerity. As the days rolled on, I took this budding relationship with Matt as an opportunity to breathe. I started to see him more as a partner in this shared responsibility rather than just a potential threat. That shift didn't come easy. There were still moments when I felt the urge to shield my kids, to declare my territory. But then I'd witness them during their visits, their giggles echoing, loud and free, and it reminded me that every step forward was a blessing. The real test came one Saturday evening. Sophie called, her voice laced with urgency. "Jake, Matt and we had a fight. He said some things, and it got heated. Can you take the kids for a few days?" Hearing her raw vulnerability made my heart race, but I immediately tailored my response to how I'd want to react, calm, collected. "Of course, I can. Just focus on you and keeping everything together." As I squeezed my kids close for a sleepover in the living room that night, each of them curled into a little ball of comfort on the couch while they drifted to sleep. And there, in that warm cocoon of blankets and pillows, I felt that flicker of hope again. This new family we were building might just be fragile, but it was rich with potential, woven together with care. In a way, we were rewriting the narrative that life had drafted for us. Maybe, just maybe, we would find peace in this chaotic co-parenting journey, moment by tender moment. Reflecting on it now, I'm still trying to figure things out, but I believe we're finding our way. I know it won't be perfect, progress rarely is, but those smiles on the kids' faces remind me that even within uncertainty, there's a promise of warmth. And for now, I'll keep nurturing that promise, wherever it may lead us. I've always loved being the fun aunt, the one who brought the best gifts and made the best jokes, but when my sister and her husband had kids, twins, no less, it felt like someone flipped a switch. Suddenly, I was supposed to shower them with unconditional love, praise, and endless affection, but all I could feel was this nagging sense of disconnect. It's not that I didn't want to love them, I just couldn't seem to connect with them the way everyone expected. I remember visiting them a few days after they came home from the hospital. There were balloons and flowers everywhere, and my sister had that glow about her that only new parents get. The little ones lay sleeping in their cribs, swaddled tightly, and I felt this profound sense of anxiety wash over me. As I sat there, pretending to coo and fuss over them, all I could think was about how quiet it was, how distant it felt, like watching a movie through a foggy lens. I can't quite pinpoint when I started feeling this way. I think it was a few months in, during family gatherings when I noticed the way everyone else looked at the twins, as if they were the center of the universe. I'd smile and play along, help change diapers and keep an eye on them when my sister needed a break, but every time they'd giggle at their parents' silly faces or reach for their hands, a part of me would turn cold. I started to dread all the family outings, feeling more like a spectator than a participant in my sister's new life. She'd look at me with those big expectant eyes, as if waiting for me to beam with pride or joy, but all I could manage was a thin smile while my chest tightened with guilt. Was this normal? I wondered if I was a bad person for not feeling that immediate rush of love everyone keeps talking about. One evening during dinner, the twins let out their loud, high-pitched cries, genuine, baby-like wails that tore through the happy chatter. Everyone jumped to their feet like they were hitting a pause button in a sitcom, and there I was, stuck at the table, fork halfway to my mouth, wondering why no one ever seemed to notice the way I felt. That night, I confided in my close friend, who suggested maybe I was just overwhelmed or needed time. "It's okay," she said, "not everyone falls in love immediately with babies. But I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe this wasn't a phase. What if I was just not cut out to be around them? As weeks turned into months, and I continued showing up for family dinners, my heart ached because I cared about my sister, her husband, and the kids in a way that felt different from what was expected of me. When my sister called me one night, so excited about their upcoming first birthday party and insisting that I prepare a special speech as the crazy aunt, I felt the weight of my silence grow heavier. I choked out some sort of muted excitement, but inside I was torn. Could I really stand in front of everyone, professing feelings that didn't live in my heart? Would they see me as the villain in this story? The climax of my internal struggle came that day at the birthday party. There were decorations everywhere, laughter filling the air, and a cacophony of joyful chaos swirling around me. As I smiled at the little darlings, I couldn't shake the feeling of just being an outsider in my own family. When it was finally my turn to speak, I stood there, looking at those tiny faces with their cake-covered smiles. "I love you guys. I really do," I finally managed, the words feeling foreign yet necessary. And in that moment, I decided to lean into the love I could muster, imperfect and uncertain as it was. It didn't have to look like my sister's love, it just had to be mine. Walking away that evening, I felt a strange mixture of relief and confusion. I hadn't solved the problem, but maybe I didn't need to be the perfect aunt. I was learning that love can take many shapes, even ones that feel unsure. As for my sister? Well, she hasn't brought it up, but I think she knows. Maybe she could see the struggle reflected in my eyes, or maybe, deep down, she just wants me there, flaws and all. I guess time will tell if things will ever change between us. For now, I'm just trying to accept this complicated journey of love and connection, one awkward family dinner at a time. As I sat at the kitchen table, the sounds of laughter and playful squeals wafted in from the living room, where my sister's kids were ramping up for another round of their favorite game. I looked at the scattered remnants of dinner, spaghetti sauce splattered across plates, a half-eaten loaf of garlic bread, and felt that familiar churn in my stomach. It wasn't the food, I've always had a knack for cooking. No, it was the noise of joy reminding me of the gulf that seemed to yawn wider every time I sat in the midst of it. My sister, Marissa, was in her element, laughing as she tried to referee the chaos, a mixture of amusement and exasperation lighting up her eyes. I couldn't help but admire her, the way she navigated the madness with grace, her love bursting at the seams and spilling over into every corner of her home. And there I sat, a few steps back, fumbling to participate without truly understanding how to engage with the lives she was so passionately building. It made me feel like an imposter in my own family, awkward and not quite fitting the mold of the cool aunt I was supposed to be. Marissa had always been the one with the booming personality. She thrived in the company of others, drawing energy from their adoration, while I often found comfort in the quiet corners, away from the spotlight. It wasn't that I didn't care about her children, I just felt a disconnect, a frayed wire in an otherwise buzzing circuit. I've often tried to connect with Lucy and Ben, aged 6 and 8, in little steps. I'd bring them treats when I visited, and I'd ask them questions about their favorite toys or the movies they liked. I wanted to understand their world, but the effort felt clumsy at times. A few weeks ago, I showed up with a brand new box of colorful markers and a stack of blank paper, hoping we could unleash some creativity together. "Look what I brought," I announced, watching eager smiles bloom like flowers. But somehow, my enthusiasm felt out of sync with theirs. They preferred the swift thrill of video games to the slower process of creating, sending me tumbling back into my insecurities. Did I even know how to be an aunt? As I caught a glimpse of my sister's easy banter with the kids, I couldn't escape the gnawing feeling that I was supposed to mirror her warmth. Maybe that was the essence of love in a family, this perfect, enveloping way of being that I struggled to emulate. It left me feeling inadequate, and in those moments, the tension would pull tight across my chest. Would they ever see me as someone who could be just as lovable, despite my hesitations? As I stared into my half-finished glass of Merlot, lost in my thoughts, I noticed Marissa glancing my way. She raised an eyebrow, and her expression shifted from amusement to something keenly perceptive, as if she could read the doubts swirling around in my mind. "Hey, wanna play with us?" Lucy's voice broke through the noise, her big eyes open wide with genuine hope. My heart fluttered, caught in the unexpected warmth of her invitation. Here was a chance to bridge the gap, to step into their world, even if it felt like a leap of faith. "I'm not very good at those games, sweetie," I replied with a hesitant smile, apologetic and self-aware. I saw a flicker of disappointment on her face, but then Ben chimed in, his enthusiasm infectious. "It doesn't matter. We'll teach you." The sheer sincerity in their voices made my heart twist in that bittersweet way. Maybe I could try. Maybe I didn't have to be perfect. In the end, I slowly made my way into the living room, resigning myself to the chaos that awaited me. The game was loud and frantic, full of the sort of competitive energy I usually avoided, one that filled me with anxiety instead of the thrill it sparked in others. I stumbled through the rules the kids shouted in tandem, mixing up characters and misinterpreting strategies, but amidst my blunders, laughter bubbled up and broke the tension like sunlight through clouds. There it was again, that feeling I often chased, the connection pulling us closer, however imperfect it was. As we played, I noticed Lucy and Ben sharing knowing glances, their laughter spilling over into my own smiles. I realized, then, that perhaps I didn't need to love them like their parents did. My love could be quieter, a whisperizing thread in their lives, invisible but strong. As the evening wound down, Marissa leaned in, her arm wrapping around my shoulder as the kids excitedly plotted their next gaming adventure. "You did good, sis. They love having you around," she said, her voice a mix of encouragement and sisterly confidence. I could feel the warmth radiating from her, a flicker of understanding passing between us. It was a moment that made the earlier conversation about love and connections feel less daunting. Maybe love doesn't always scream, sometimes, it hums softly in shared spaces, even in silence. Sitting there surrounded by laughter and chaos, I dared to believe that love could grow in unexpected ways, holding imperfections at its center, and for the first time in a long while, I felt unburdened and content, like I belonged, flaws and all. As the evening wore on, I watched my sister interact with her kids, their laughter wrapping around us like a warm blanket. The way she knelt down to tie her youngest shoelaces, turning it into a game, her eldest giggling as they made silly faces at each other, I felt the edges of my heart begin to soften, the tension of my earlier doubts easing just a little. For so long, I had been an outsider in their world, fumbling through interactions with awkwardness, feeling like I was always one step behind in terms of affection. I sipped my drink, pretending to keep up with the adult conversations around me while stealing glances at my niece and nephew, watching them scramble for toys, their joy palpable. It was exhausting trying to figure out where I fit in, but with each chuckle that escaped their lips, I began to see pieces of myself reflected back at me, children thriving in their small universe of imagination. I leaned back in my chair and tried to enjoy the noise, the clattering of Legos on the floor and the hum of animated discussions about superheroes. "Hey, Auntie! Look at this." My niece suddenly popped up beside me, clutching a crumpled piece of paper covered in colorful scribbles. She was beaming, her eyes sparkling with pride. "I made this just for you." I took the paper from her hands, the vibrant colors swirling chaotically across the page. It was an abstract masterpiece, a jumble of shapes that could be anything from rainbows to monsters. I felt a surge of affection, not because I was suddenly head over heels for her or fulfilling a norm of being the doting aunt, but because I saw her. I saw how hard she had worked to create something for me, to share a piece of her world, and that was something to cherish. "Wow. I love it." I grinned wider than I had in weeks. Her face lit up like a Christmas tree, and in that instant, I knew this small exchange was a step forward, not a leap, but still something. I felt a stir of belonging that was heavy with imperfections. I looked over to my sister, and for a brief moment, our glances locked. Her smile was knowing, a shared acknowledgement of the work both of us were putting into our relationships. As the night progressed, I began to breathe a little easier, my laughter joining the cacophony of voices, allowing myself to be swept up in the nuances of family life. For several more hours, we huddled together around a mess of dinner plates, overflowed drinks, and overwhelmed conversations. When I left that night, I felt lighter than I had in ages. It was still going to be a long road. I wasn't naive enough to think that everything would magically change overnight. But I found solace in understanding that I didn't need to love my sister's children the way she did, just my version of love, whatever that might look like, was perfectly valid. Perhaps love could be like this beautiful mess we'd created that night, a patchwork of doodles, varied textures, shades, and overlapping lines. Weeks turned into months, and as the holidays approached, I couldn't shake the sense of change that lingered in the air. I started offering to babysit occasionally, wanting to break through the barrier of unfamiliarity that had once made me feel like an outsider. I found myself emerging from my shell, directing silly puppet shows with mismatched socks, playing hide and seek in the corners of their home, and reading story after story until nap time was unavoidable. Each time I returned home, I would hang up my coat and find a small piece of my newfound warmth nestling in the pocket, a token of connection I didn't realize I was building. Looking back on that conversation with my sister, I realized how important it was for her too. She'd carved out space for me to be precisely who I was, without any expectations of perfection. It was in the little moments, the fleeting glances and shared laughter, that love unveiled itself in new forms. Perhaps we all could lean into our uncertainties, knowing that something beautiful could stem from the chaos, the imperfections, and the undying effort to bridge gaps, one family dinner, and one awkward exchange, at a time. I still think about that night occasionally, especially when I spy my niece decorating another crayon masterpiece, or my nephew zooming around with a superhero cape flapping in the wind. Love is like a starting point on a canvas, it unfolds endlessly, and I'm beginning to understand that being part of their world is just as special as creating my own path too. And in this ongoing journey, I'm learning to embrace the surprises and to keep the dialogue open, because maybe it's in the imperfections that we find the most authentic forms of connection. I don't want to drive with you in the car. Those were the exact words that almost escalated into a full-blown meltdown one Saturday morning as my wife, Liz, and I stood in the kitchen, me absently sipping coffee and her packing the picnic basket for our long-anticipated family outing. Just to clarify, I wasn't saying I didn't want her in my life, it was more about the roller coaster of emotions that driving together managed to bring out in both of us. You know how every couple has their things? Ours seemed to be car rides. Every trip somehow transformed into an arena for argument, highlighting all the petty grievances that usually simmered under the surface. Most days, I didn't mind driving her around, but the last few outings played out like a highlight reel of our little squabbles, her getting anxious over how I drove, me getting irritated with her constant directions. Then came that fateful trip to the farmer's market, where a simple misunderstanding led to a shouting match over directions and somehow spiraled into accusations about who cared more about the event. I remember the tension sitting heavy in the air long after we parked, the bustling sounds around us drowned out by that uncomfortable silence lingering between us. So, one morning during breakfast chatter, she casually asked if I would drive to her sister's house that weekend. My heart sank, and I felt those familiar knots tightening in my stomach. The previous outings had left me drained and worn down, and I just snapped. I wasn't proud of it, my tone might have been sharper than I'd intended, but I couldn't help it. The idea of getting into that car with her again filled me with a sense of dread. I explained my feelings, how every drive felt like a trigger for us both, and any simple disagreement quickly escalated into something bigger. Liz's face fell. I could see betrayal mixed in with confusion, and her disappointment hit me like a punch to the gut. Am I really that unbearable? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. And in that moment, my frustration twisted into guilt. I loved her, how could I make her feel this way? The air felt thick with unspoken words as I tried to articulate my thoughts. I wanted her to understand why I would rather drop her off at the door and let her go in alone rather than endure another trip marred by tension. But all she saw was a husband unwilling to support his wife with something as simple as driving. It felt like we were caught in this cyclical frustration, and my heart ached contemplating our distance. The car ride that day never happened. Instead, I suggested we take separate cars so we could meet there. She reluctantly agreed, but the grumble of her irked annoyance echoed long after she stormed off to get ready. I kept thinking back to that moment, tossing and turning as I questioned whether I had crossed a line or if this was a necessary boundary for my own mental well-being. Days later, I found myself sifting through various Reddit threads, poring over stories that mirrored our dynamics. Surely, I wasn't the first one with a spouse I struggled to share space with during commutes. I even contemplated posting my own version of AITA for refusing to drive if my wife is in the car. But a part of me hesitated. Deep down, I knew Liz cared, and I didn't want to turn our argument into a public spectacle. As I sat there contemplating, it struck me how foolish it seemed to navigate our lives around this one issue. I decided to approach the subject with her again. Maybe I could suggest a little help from a counselor, a group session to learn how to communicate better in those confined spaces. I prepared for another confrontation, but surprisingly, when I brought it up, her response was a sigh of relief, admitting she also felt the struggle but didn't know how to address it without making it worse. It was a small victory, one that reminded me that love is more than just beating around the bush. It sometimes means having those awkward conversations, even when they make your stomach churn. The road ahead may be bumpy, but I have hope that with a little patience and awareness, we can learn to drive together again, both literally and metaphorically. As the weeks rolled by, that small victory began to ripple into the fabric of our everyday life. We found ourselves seated across from one another more often, each conversation occasionally uncomfortable but always honest. The tension I had imagined would linger started to dissipate into something softer, almost like a mirage that fades as you approach it. Still, every time I slipped into the driver's seat with her beside me, my mind flooded with images of our past drives, moments that felt both intimate and painfully stifling. I remembered that one time we drove to the coast, laughing at how close my car came to the edge of the cliffside. I could still hear her shriek mixed with laughter as I swerved to avoid a pothole. In that memory, I felt a bittersweet ache. Those joyous days had fallen prey to an unspoken strain that was hard to articulate. One evening, while we were watching one of those awful reality shows, where people threw drinks at one another over petty arguments, I snuck a glance at her from the corner of my eye. She looked so content, yet a hint of melancholy rested in her gaze. This time I took the plunge. "Do you think we can go on a drive soon?" I asked, somewhat hesitantly. I was greeted with a skeptical arch of her eyebrow, and my heart raced in response. I rushed to clarify, "I mean a short one. Just to the park, with windows down, no destination." She paused, chewing on her lip before nodding slowly, but I could tell there were layers beneath that simple gesture. I could sense that she was weighing her answer against the awkwardness we had been navigating. "Okay, but we have to promise to communicate this time. No silent treatment, all right?" "Deal," I said, relief washing over me. When the day came, sunny and promising, I found myself standing outside the car for what felt like an eternity. She sidled up to me, and for a flicker of a moment, anxiety gnawed at the edges of my excitement. Had we really untangled the threads? Would it snap back to the old ways once we hit the road? With a deep breath, I opened the door for her, trying to fit that old romantic script despite our recent battles. As we drove, my nerves had a friend in the cool breeze flowing through the open windows. I dared to give a sideways glance at her, and to my surprise, she was smiling, a look I hadn't seen in what felt like eons. "I think I actually missed this," she said lightly. The casualness of her voice struck me, wrapping around me like a cozy blanket. There were a few quiet moments where I could feel the air between us change, morphing into something more comfortable than before. Halfway to the park, she turned to me with earnest curiosity and asked, "What was it that made you refuse to drive with me before?" The question hung in the air like a low-hanging mist. I felt trapped, I guess. It'd start as just us driving, and then I'd feel like our conversations were running out of gas. I often felt like I had to suppress my thoughts just to keep things smooth. Like we were always dodging potholes while ignoring the road ahead. She nodded, absorbing my words. That's exactly how I felt too. I was afraid to steer us into any territory that might end up with us arguing in the car, and it made me anxious. I didn't want to face that tension when it was just supposed to be a simple drive. "Why did we let it come to that?" I asked, almost more to myself than her, but she answered, her voice softer now. "Because trying to keep things perfect put pressure on us. We let the unease grow like weeds in a garden." Suddenly, I felt a weight lift, and the path ahead didn't seem so wound up in knots. This drive was no longer steeped in fear, but in reflections of moments we both cherished, nestled in between the unspoken worries. The park was just ahead when she reached for my hand, and I turned to see her looking at me with an openness I hadn't realized I was yearning for. "Let's not keep dodging the bumps anymore," she said, squeezing my hand. "Yeah, let's just drive," I replied, and as we turned into the park, I felt a resurgence of hope fill the cabin. The journey together was far from over, but it felt worth taking. We parked under an oak tree, the sunlight dancing through the branches, flickering between our faces as we looked at each other, perhaps for the first time in a long while, not just as partners sharing the road but as companions rediscovering each other, leaning into the uncertainty with a hopeful spirit. In the weeks that followed, we traded drives for hikes, park picnics, and late-night talks in our living room. Each outing became an act of reclaiming what had been lost, weaving in and out of nurturing our bond. And occasionally, our conversations would dive deep into the past where unspoken grievances lived, and we would laugh at the absurdity of how it took a struggle to glide us back into the comfort of companionship. I think hindsight can sometimes be more liberating than we give it credit for. We may still have our moments of shaky ground ahead, but for now, I know we'd learned something invaluable, the beauty of simply sharing the ride, bumps and all. I found myself smiling more as the days stretched into weeks, the sunlight filtering through our kitchen window in the morning, illuminating the promise of a new day. It felt strange, almost surreal, how conversations that once felt like precarious tightropes transformed into bridges connecting our hearts. One Saturday morning, as we were preparing breakfast, I caught her humming softly to the tune of an old song that echoed through the house. I couldn't help but join in with a slightly off-key harmony, and we both laughed at my attempt. In that moment, It was as if a weight had lifted, and the air between us crackled with a vibrant energy I hadn't felt in a long time. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were still remnants of that tension whenever we approached the car. I remember the day we decided to take a drive together to visit the farmer's market, a small outing that was supposed to be relaxing. As I turned the ignition, the engine's growl filled the air, and an unspoken apprehension crawled back into my gut. I caught a brief flicker in her eyes, a hesitant glance towards the dashboard, as if she feared that the journey we were about to take would steer us off course again. I took a deep breath, recalling all the progress we had made, and turned to her. "Ready?" I asked, hoping my voice conveyed more confidence than I felt. She nodded, but I could see the edges of her lips twitching slightly, betraying the unease beneath her composed facade. As we merged onto the road, I felt the familiar squeeze of tension in my chest. The world outside zipped by, green trees blurring into a colorful tapestry, yet it felt like we were suspended in a moment that could tip either way. Halfway through, while we waited at a red light, I started talking about the summer plans, the vacation we had dreamed about, and how excited I was to explore new places with her. Slowly, she unwound, sharing snippets of her thoughts, her laughter beginning to spill into the cabin, easing the weight of past shadows. It was like oil on troubled waters. Our rhythm returned, the easy banter making the ride feel less like a challenge and more like an adventure. Yet, it was only when we parked in the lot, surrounded by laughter and the sweet scent of fresh produce, that it hit me. These outings were not just about conquering our fears but weaving a tapestry of memories, day by day, thread by thread. I watched as she slid out of the car, her face lighting up with joy at the sight of the market stalls. I realized then that this was what it meant to truly reconnect, to embrace the small moments, to not just share the driving but also the laughter that flourished in the little things. As we wandered, hand in hand, between bright displays of fruits and flowers, I felt that perhaps the real treasure was not in trying to eradicate the past but in learning how to navigate it together, combining our strengths. Even moments of silence held a new promise. We had learned to be present with each other, to sit with the stillness without letting it navigate our emotions. Months later, I found myself reflecting. Our dynamic had transformed in ways I hadn't expected. Occasionally, we still stumbled into those old patterns, where one of us would retreat or slip into silence, but now we approached those moments with awareness. I'd suggest we take a drive to unwind, ensuring we'd set the tone early, sometimes with a silly playlist or a game to keep the atmosphere buoyant. Each journey felt like a rediscovery, a chance to create new memories that overshadow the shadows of our past. Life isn't always perfect, and maybe it's in the flaws where our story truly breathes, vibrant and imperfectly beautiful. I still don't know what the future holds. Maybe more bumps, more lessons, or perhaps a serenity we haven't yet touched. But as I navigated through this winding road of life with her by my side, I found solace in the thought that we were learning together. And that in itself was worth every hesitant mile we'd faced together. I still remember the excitement I felt leading up to my 30th birthday party. It wasn't just another year, it felt like a milestone, a moment to cherish, surrounded by friends and laughter. I planned everything meticulously. The decorations were vibrant, the food was catered from my favorite local eatery, and I'd even hired a small band to play some live music. My close friends were excited, and I could hardly contain my joy. But then came the day, and everything turned upside down when Sarah, my longtime friend, the one I thought would be there by my side, arrived with her squawking 1-year-old in tow. I could hardly believe my eyes. As I wrapped my arms around her for a hug, I noticed the baby, a tiny creature with bright eyes and a loud wail, clinging to her. "Hey, I couldn't find a babysitter last minute," she said with an apologetic smile. I'd always been supportive of my friends and their parenting struggles, but there was a time and a place. This wasn't it. As the evening wore on, the baby cried incessantly, punctuating the lively music with screams that made small talk nearly impossible. I felt my heart sinking. My friends were dodging the noise, trying their best to focus on conversations, but I could see the cliques breaking apart, the laughter dwindling. It was devastating to watch something that I'd meticulously crafted slowly deteriorate into chaos. I'd waited so long for a night of celebration, and now, all I could think about was how to salvage the joy. After a while, I found Sarah alone in the kitchen, the baby resting uncharacteristically quiet in her arms. I could see it in her eyes, she was tired, and I knew the stress of this situation weighed heavily on her. But I thought about all my friends gathered in my living room, their faces strained in an effort to connect amid the wreckage of the birthday festivities. So, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to say. "Sarah," I started, my voice low and shaky, I really appreciate you coming, but it's tough for everyone with the baby here. Do you think you could?" I trailed off, unsure how to finish. I saw thoughts racing across Sarah's face, hurt, understanding, and then a kind of acceptance tinged with sorrow. "You want me to leave?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "It's my birthday, and I just wanted a fun night with everyone," I replied, my heart aching. In that moment, I felt like the villain of my own story. Asking her to leave felt selfish, but staying meant sacrificing my happiness, and potentially everyone else's. With a sad smile, she nodded, understanding the difficult position I was in. "I'll go." "I'm sorry," she murmured. As I watched her gather her things and slip away into the night, I felt a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Relief washed over me, mixed with guilt that left a heavy stone sitting in my gut. I couldn't believe I'd asked a friend to leave, but the party resumed after her exit. The music felt lighter, the laughter returned, but in the quiet moments, I kept reflecting on what had just happened. Was I truly the asshole for wanting a night free of distractions? I spent days questioning my choice and wondering if I'd made the right decision. It felt wrong to sacrifice the joy of my celebration for what felt like a moment of parental struggle. Eventually, I reached out to Sarah, uncertain and nervous, but I knew I needed closure. To my surprise, she responded with grace, assuring me that I wasn't a bad friend. She understood. We talked, and she shared the exhaustion and difficulty of being a new parent, how hard it was to navigate friendships that once felt easy. As we worked through the emotions, our bond deepened, and I realized that sometimes, in friendships, things get messy, and it's okay to feel conflicted. It didn't totally erase my guilt, but knowing she understood made it a little bit lighter. That birthday became a lesson wrapped in a celebration, the importance of communication, understanding, and the love that binds us, even when situations get messy. As the night wore on, the air around us thick with balloons and the scent of cake, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed since the prior awkward moments. Laughter floated through the room like a warm blanket, reminding me of the joy we had all gathered to share. My friends were unwaveringly supportive, sipping their drinks and sharing stories, and it felt like the chaotic energy from earlier had melted into something more comfortable. Everyone had rallied to lift my spirits after that initial frustration, and in that moment, I began to feel celebratory again. But it didn't just stop there. My conversation with Sarah had opened my eyes to her world. I watched as she lovingly cradled her baby, who had finally quieted down, his little head resting against her shoulder. The sight brought a new wave of understanding. I had never completely grasped the challenges she faced as a new mother, the weight of responsibility mixed with exhaustion. As we spoke deeper into the night, she shared anecdotes from those first few months, the frightening sleepless nights, the endless worries, the whirlwind of love and confusion that came with a tiny human being entirely dependent on her. I found it fascinating, the way she navigated her life now so differently than before, and while my birthday was supposed to be about me, it had quickly become a channel for both of us to process our feelings, her about the struggles of new parenthood, me about feeling selfish for wanting the party to be a carefree escape. In those moments of raw honesty, I could sense our friendship evolve. It wasn't just me and Sarah from college trying to cling to the past. We were two adults carving out a new understanding of each other, moving forward even if our paths didn't look the same anymore. We laughed, cried, and even joked about how I could have set up a designated baby zone at my party, something I wouldn't have imagined saying just a few hours earlier. It felt refreshing to let go of the guilt that had been chasing me since that afternoon. I didn't know how to balance all these conflicting feelings, but talking it out with her made it feel less like a burden. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, and my friends began to trickle out with dollops of cake in hand, I felt a soft weight settle in my chest. It was a bittersweet mix of joy and melancholy. While the party was winding down, I also realized that this night had given birth to an unexpected clarity. I wrapped my arms around Sarah, and she melted into the hug like we'd done so many times before in our carefree youth. Instead of the usual light-hearted farewells, I whispered how grateful I was for her, and she echoed the sentiment. I could see it in her eyes. She was still the same friend I'd known, just now with layers, stories, and scars that I hadn't understood before. Later that night, after everyone had trickled away, I sat alone at the remnants of my birthday party, an untouched piece of cake still glaring at me from the table. I realized how this new chapter was more than just me getting older. It was about understanding that friendships ebb and flow with the seasons of life. We might not be able to hang out like we used to or do spontaneous fun things, but what we could do was find new bonds in the changes, in the complexities. It definitely wouldn't be smooth sailing, but after tonight, I felt excited to navigate it all together, kinks and all. This birthday, marked by its chaos, had gifted me the insight that sometimes what we need most is to listen, to empathize, and to embrace the messiness. Isn't that what growing up is about? As I fell asleep that night, visions of laughter and quiet conversations danced through my mind, weaving a tapestry that felt more profound than any single celebration could encapsulate. The days following the party carried a kind of buoyant energy, a strange mix of nostalgia and hope that wrapped around me like a favorite sweater. I found myself reaching out more frequently to Mia, now not just because of obligation, but out of genuine interest in her experiences as a new mom. Our conversations began to evolve. We'd swap horror stories about sleepless nights smeared with moments of joy that made the chaos feel almost poetic. I realized I'd never fully appreciated how much love and sheer determination went into being a parent until Mia shared her day-to-day reality, painting the mundane and the profound with the same brush. It was beautiful in its honest messiness, just like the night of my birthday. One rainy Thursday, as the sky poured like it was trying to wash the world clean, Mia stopped by for coffee. The heavy scent of freshly brewed espresso filled my small apartment as we nestled into the couch, her with her favorite throw blanket draped over her shoulders, me with a comfy sweatshirt and an eagerness that buzzed in the air around us. We laughed at an embarrassing story I shared about my awkward teenage years, and I could see her eyes light up as she ventured into her own past indignities. It felt like we were reclaiming some of the uncomplicated joys we'd shared before parenthood had stepped in to complicate things. But just when I thought the moment was blissfully drifting toward nostalgia, her phone erupted into a symphony of cries and vibrations. She looked apologetic as she fumbled for the device, and in that instant, it hit me just how much her life had changed. I could see the toll it took, the way her smile faltered for just a moment, like she was being pulled back into a world of responsibilities and sleepless nights. She answered the call, and I listened softly as the familiar sounds of a cooing baby interspersed with honking cars drifted from her phone. Often, I'd tried to imagine where our friendship would go, how the kids would be a part of it, or how midnight calls would intersect with a new reality. But in that instant, seeing her navigate motherhood while holding on to our friendship, it felt like we were carving a new path together, one where complexities were acknowledged but not allowed to choke the bond we had. Post-call, Mia looked exhausted but refreshed, a paradox I was getting used to witnessing. "Sorry, it was my mom. She's picking up dinner so I can actually enjoy a night off," she explained, her voice lightening. I teased her about how she wasn't taking me out for dinner, and she laughed openly, the hearty sound pouring warmth through the room. As the evening rolled on, we settled into a comforting rhythm of conversation that breathed life back into our friendship. There was an unspoken agreement, to meet somewhere in the middle where kids and adult lives could merge without erasing who we once were. Our talks shifted between dreams for the future, both personal and professional, and sometimes we would pause, reflecting on the rather surprising detour our lives had taken. Each shared moment fortified our connection, and I found myself increasingly grateful for the present, for what we were building. Nights like these became the norm. A cozy dinner here, an impromptu playdate there, each hangout reinforced the idea that friendship was about adaptability. Mia's son came to frequent our get-togethers, and he'd inevitably end up stealing the show, his giggles filling the gaps of our sometimes serious adult conversations. While there were still moments of overwhelming chaos, and I admit, there were times when I found myself longing for those carefree days without baby talk and nap schedules, I often felt a new richness in the friendship that was slowly blossoming. As time passed, those tidbits of laughter echoed in my home, changing what I thought was needed to celebrate life's milestones. I came to embrace the idea that growth doesn't come from shying away from challenges but rather from embracing them fully. Each new layer added depth to our friendship, reminding me how still water runs deep. There was a moment, weeks after the party and our newfound understanding, when I had a creeping thought of guilt rise back up. Had it all been worth it? The struggles felt real and convoluted. But on a sunny afternoon with a gentle breeze wafting through my windows, as Mia's son giggled and reached for a crayon, painting the world with bright strokes, I felt an overwhelming wash of certainty. I was so glad I'd navigated this journey with her. Friendships may bend, but they don't break, they just find new shapes, new stories to tell. As I looked at Mia, her laughter and genuine happiness spilling over, I realized I wouldn't trade this journey for anything. I always envisioned my daughter's baby shower as a joyful celebration, the kind where laughter fills the air and love wraps around us like a warm blanket. I spent months planning it, poring over details to create a cozy and inviting atmosphere, twinkling lights, pastel colors, and little treats I knew my friends would love. I wanted it to be a day where my family and friends could come together, share stories, and relish this exciting new chapter in our lives. That's why, when my sister-in-law, Claire, showed up unannounced the day before the shower, I felt that familiar tightness in my chest. You see, Claire and I have a rocky history. Her relentlessly critical nature sometimes tarnishes our family gatherings, and I feared that her presence would cast a shadow over what I hoped would be a joyful day. When I opened the door to find her standing there with a half-hearted smile and a newly purchased gift bag, my stomach sank. I stiffened, trying to pull myself together while also preparing for the inevitable flood of unsolicited advice about parenting that usually flowed from her lips. I took a deep breath, my mind racing, wondering how to navigate this unexpected complication. "Why are you here?" I asked, trying to sound casual yet firm. "I thought I'd swing by to help," she said, her voice dripping with feigned sweetness. A small part of me wanted to appreciate the gesture, but the overwhelming anxiety in my gut screamed at me to set boundaries. "I appreciate that, Claire, but I really want this to be a special day for my daughter. Maybe you can join us later?" The silence felt heavy, and I swore I could hear the tension crackling between us. She raised an eyebrow, clearly taken aback. "You're kicking me out of my own family event?" There it was, the manipulation I expected, wrapped up in a tone that screamed victim. I could feel frustration bubbling beneath my skin, fighting my desire to explain myself. "I'm not trying to kick you out, I just want a peaceful celebration, and it feels like you bring a certain heaviness." My words hung in the air, sounding harsher than I intended, but they contained the truth of how I felt. Claire's expression flickered, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw hurt before it was replaced with indignation. "Fine. Enjoy your little party," she spat, turning on her heel and striding away, her dignity seemingly shattered. As I closed the door, I felt a mixture of relief and guilt wash over me. Had I been unfair? Was I the one being an asshole for prioritizing my own peace? The idea gnawed at me throughout that night, every moment of silence filled with doubt. The next day, the shower unfurled just as I imagined it would. Friends and family mingled freely, laughter bubbled over like the fizzy drinks in our glasses, and for several hours, my heart soared. But every time I saw my brother arriving solo, I felt that same guilt creep back in as I remembered Claire sitting alone somewhere, nursing a wounded pride. I tried to enjoy myself, but the ghost of that confrontation loomed until I finally said goodbye to the last of my guests. Later that night, when I scrolled through social media, I stumbled across several tagged pictures from the shower. I looked happy, surrounded by friends and family, yet a nagging thought kept echoing in my head. Did I handle it right, or did I let my insecurities ruin my relationship with her? In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling of unresolved tension. I started questioning whether this was just a symptom of something deeper in our family dynamics. Would I regret my decision down the line? So I reached out to my brother, and we talked about everything, from Claire's behavior to how I felt navigating family interactions. Surprisingly, he acknowledged my perspective. He even promised to talk to her about it, suggesting perhaps a reconciliation could be achieved, allowing us to move forward as a family. As I sat with those thoughts, I finally understood, it's not about being right or wrong, but about learning to communicate and help each other grow. And with that realization, I felt a tiny flicker of hope for our family moving forward. As I hung up the phone with my brother, there was a strange mix of relief and uncertainty flooding my thoughts. I couldn't help but wonder how my sister-in-law would take the conversation when my brother confronted her. Would she be open to understanding my side of things, or would it just spiral into more drama? I thought back to the baby shower, the way she'd scoffed at every detail, how her presence felt like a weight pressing down on what should have been a joyous occasion. I spent days anxiously anticipating my brother's next move while centering myself in preparation for whatever fallout might come. On Thursday evening, I found myself in the living room with my partner, Jess, trying to wind down from the day. The baby shower was still fresh in my mind, and I divulged everything about the conversation I'd had with my brother. I shared my worries, my hope, and a hint of guilt for speaking up so firmly that day. "Do you think I went too far?" I asked, wringing my hands. Jess looked over at me from the couch, their brow furrowed in thought. "You did what you felt was necessary to protect yourself and your daughter. I get that family can complicate emotions, but you have every right to set boundaries." They took a deep breath, as if choosing their words carefully. Sometimes, the toughest conversations end up being the most important ones. I appreciated their perspective, though the voice of doubt still nagged at me. Was I being overly dramatic? Would my actions alienate my brother in the end? Time ticked away, and as weekends typically go, the anxiety simmered until it finally boiled over. It was Sunday afternoon when my brother called me again. I could feel my heart racing as I prepared for whatever news he had. "Hey, can we talk?" he said as usual, but his tone was different this time, more serious and thoughtful. We chatted for a bit about everyday things, the weather, what was going on in our lives, and then he dove deep into the reason for his call. "Claire and I had it out," he started, and my chest tightened. Adrenaline coursed through me as he continued. "I told her about your concerns and how her actions felt dismissive and hurtful. She didn't take it well at first, and it got pretty heated." My palms turned clammy as I envisioned this altercation, but I kept quiet, allowing him to share his experience fully. "But, we also talked about what you brought up, about family and communication. She didn't like that, but I think it got through to her eventually. I said she needs to realize that it's not just her who's part of this family, you and your daughter matter too. That it's okay for her to feel how she feels, but pushing negativity on our family during a celebration crosses a line." My heart swelled with pride for my brother. He understood where I was coming from, yet I felt a weight settle in my stomach for Claire. "She agreed to meet with you," he said before there was a long pause. "But it's going to take time. I think she feels embarrassed, but I told her she can't just ignore how everyone else feels." I nodded along, though he couldn't see me. "Thanks for doing that," I managed to say, my voice thick with emotion. We set a tentative plan for Claire to come over the following Saturday, and as I hung up the phone, a part of me felt as if I was stepping onto a delicate tightrope. That Saturday morning, the atmosphere in our home was charged with both excitement and apprehension. Jess helped me freshen up the living room, as if that would magically solve any underlying tension. We set out snacks and drinks while I chastised myself for fussing over everything, overly conscious of every detail. Jess took my hands and squeezed them, grounding me before the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, Claire stood there, arms crossed defensively. It struck me just how different she looked in person compared to the fiery persona she projected during the shower. Beneath that tough exterior, I sensed genuine vulnerability. I offered her a timid smile and invited her in. "Thanks for coming," I said softly, and she nodded, still reserved. There was an uncomfortable pause before Jess left us alone, sensing the tension in the air. "So, this is awkward," Claire finally said, breaking the silence. I nodded, letting her lead the conversation. "I know I was out of line at the baby shower." She hesitated, and my heart softened at her admission. "And it's just, I've been feeling all these things. I thought maybe my comments would lighten the mood, but looking back, I see how they hurt you," she murmured, her eyes casting downward. There was something so raw in her admission that my anger started to ebb away. We talked for what felt like hours, revealing insecurities and fears about family and future expectations. I was surprised by her honesty. It had been easier for her to guard herself with mocking humor than to admit how vulnerable she felt. I also shared my struggles, how the thought of raising a daughter in a family dynamic filled with tension was daunting. In the end, we both ended up standing on common ground, needing and wanting change, but also wanting to protect our family ties. We ended with tentative apologies and a vague commitment to try rebuilding this bridge between us. As she left that day, I felt lighter. Despite the uncertainty still hanging in the air, I recognized that healing would take time, but at least we had begun the journey together. It wouldn't be easy, and I knew that bumps were still ahead. Yet in that moment, I figured that was okay. We were, after all, trying to learn how to communicate better, as my brother had said. And maybe, just maybe, we could grow together. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself caught in a gentle tug-of-war between hope and skepticism. The baby shower planning was in full swing, the air buzzing with excitement over upcoming decorations and tiny outfits we'd be bringing to life soon for our little girl. I would wake up each morning with the sweet taste of anticipation, only to have my thoughts interrupted by flashes of past interactions with Claire. Would she really change? Would our family gatherings begin to feel lighter, filled with laughter instead of tension? I often sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my phone, wondering if I should reach out to Claire again. But then, a familiar voice in my head would echo, reminding me of previous disappointments, times I thought things would get better, only to be left with an empty feeling when they didn't. The baby shower was 2 days away when my brother called to say he had spoken with her. "She's willing to try," he said, his voice filled with a mix of hope and caution. I felt that flicker brighten momentarily, but it quickly dimmed as I remembered the many times Claire's words felt empty, a mix of falseness masked under the guise of a smile. As the day approached, I focused on the little details. Friends were coming over to help, laughter floated through our living room as we decorated with pastel bunting and clusters of balloons. But deep down, I couldn't shake the knot in my stomach. Would Claire spoil this moment for me? I tried to breathe in the joy around me, allowing myself to appreciate the love and support I was surrounded by, but every burst of laughter found its way back to the worry in my heart. When the day finally arrived, the sun poured through our kitchen windows, glinting off the table full of presents and homemade snacks. Cups of pink lemonade sparkled under the bright decorations, and I found myself smiling, my daughter kicking gently within me as I soaked in the moment. I took a deep breath, feeling a swell of gratitude for the friends who were there to share this special day, yet the doorbell rang and my heart plummeted. It was Claire. She stood on the porch, dressed in soft shades of pastel, holding a wrapped gift that looked, at least on the outside, inviting. I hesitated, standing by the door as my breath caught in my throat. I had hoped this space would remain a sanctuary, something untouched by previous conflict. "Hey, Claire," I said, forcing a smile as she stepped inside, her eyes scanning the joyful chaos. There was a moment of dread before I noticed her trying to fit in, even cracking a joke about how she almost got lost in the sea of balloons. I realized I had expected a storm but was met with blue skies instead. Yet as we mingled, I felt the tension churn within me. Small talk turned into awkward exchanges, and I clutched my drink tightly, afraid of saying the wrong thing. Claire's laughter sometimes felt forced, and the look in her eyes hinted at something deeper, the fear of not belonging. By mid-afternoon, I managed to pull Claire aside, the chatter around us fading as I took a leap of faith. "I appreciate you coming today, genuinely. It means a lot to me," I started, my voice steadying with the weight of sincerity. "But I also need you to know, I want you to just be real with me. If you're feeling uneasy or if something bothers you, can we talk about it together? I want this to be a place of honesty." She blinked, surprise flickering across her face, and instead of pushing away or shutting down, she sighed. "And I need to say something, too. I realize I haven't been the best sister-in-law. I guess I was scared of losing my brother and misunderstood your situation. I can't promise to be anyone but me, but I'll try to be better." With that, something changed between us. The knot in my stomach loosened, and for the first time, I could see Claire not just as a competitor for my brother's love but as someone grappling with her own insecurities. As we moved back to join the others, I felt lighter. We didn't speak of everything, the hurt, the misunderstandings, but the air between us carried the weight of a fragile pact. The rest of the shower passed in waves of laughter, shared stories, and a few tears. Claire even took a moment to help me with gifts, her smile no longer a mask but a beacon of newfound understanding. As the day drew to a close, I watched as my friends and family gathered. In that chaos stood a possibility I never thought I'd see, a family learning to navigate their imperfections together. I felt a bittersweet recognition that we were nowhere near perfect, but perhaps, that was okay. We weren't just learning to communicate, we were learning to accept each other's twisted paths. Maybe, as the years unfolded, Claire and I could continue peeling back the layers. I closed the door behind our last guest, feeling the warmth of connection blaze softly, promising to cultivate that flicker into something undeniable. Life would still have its bumps, it always does, but now, I felt we had sprouted seeds of empathy among us. And for now, that was more than enough. I never thought I'd be caught in the middle of a family drama, but here I am, standing in the kitchen, staring blankly at the pasta that didn't really seem to care about my life decisions. My dad had been married to Linda for about 3 years now, and while I'd tried my best to welcome her, I always felt a twinge of discomfort every time she tried to step into the role of mother in my life. It wasn't that she was a bad person, in fact, she was often kind and even funny at times, but she could never replace the void my mom left when she passed away when I was just a little kid. That morning, Linda had taken a moment to sit me down and remind me how important it was for us to bond as a family. "We need to create our own traditions, sweetie," she said, her voice warm and hopeful. I nodded, mostly just processing the fact that I had burned my thumbs while cooking. But inside, I felt like I was being backed into a corner. When she started telling me stories of her upbringing, sharing her formative moments, it felt invasive, like she was rewriting the narrative of my life without asking for my input. It came to a head later that evening when, after dinner, she asked me if I would call her mom at least once, just to make her feel special. My heart was racing, and without thinking, I blurted out, "I'm sorry, but you're not my mom." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the clatter of my fork dropping onto my plate. I watched Linda's face fall, her smile replaced by a look of shock that felt like a physical blow. I could hear my dad in the other room, and suddenly, the air felt thick with unspoken words. Did I go too far? I thought, staring at Linda, who blinked back tears. It was all so confusing. I wanted to comfort her, but I also felt resentful. Did it even matter how she felt? My mom had been my whole world, and trying to fit Linda into that space felt wrong. I couldn't help but reflect on the harshness of my words, but part of me felt justified. After a long, awkward moment, my dad finally stepped in, trying to soothe the tension. "Let's take a break," he suggested, awkwardly glancing between us while Linda excused herself to the bathroom, clearly on the edge of sobbing. In that moment, I felt like the villain of a story I didn't even want to be a part of, as anguish and guilt wrapped around my heart like a heavy blanket. Leaving the kitchen, I felt lost, unsure of what to do. Was I an asshole for being honest, or was I simply trying to protect my own heart? A week passed, and the atmosphere in our house grew thick with unspoken sentiments. Linda was quieter at dinner, and my dad tried to bridge the gap, mentioning counseling, family dinners, and even board games. I wanted to scream that nothing could replace the bond I had with my real mom, but instead, I shoved my feelings deep down, hoping they would just dissolve. One evening, as I lay in bed, I replayed Linda's face, and it haunted me. I realized I did owe her some understanding. She was trying and maybe deserved more than I was willing to give. I gathered my thoughts, and the next day, I approached her, my stomach churning. "Can we talk?" I asked, my voice shaky. I watched her expression shift from guarded to curious. Sitting down together, I took a breath. "I think I overreacted the other day. I really appreciate what you're trying to do, but I kind of felt blindsided. I miss my mom." There was a long pause, and then she nodded, tears pooling in her eyes. "I miss my mom too," she whispered, and I finally saw her vulnerability shine through the walls she put up. It was the start of something, an understanding that maybe we could find common ground, even if it didn't lead to anything resembling a replacement. Days turned to weeks, and with each shared meal and tentative conversation, I felt cracks in the walls between us. It wasn't easy, but learning to navigate the relationship felt less like a betrayal to my mom's memory and more like a testament to forging my path forward. There wasn't a moment that settled everything perfectly, but we were trying, and that felt like a small victory. So, am I the asshole for telling Linda that she's not my mom? I suppose I didn't mean to be hurtful, but sometimes in the messiness of family bonds, honesty is its own form of love, and over time, I hope we can build something new from it. I think about that moment every day, how it felt to say the words out loud. "You're not my mom, Linda." They hung in the air like a heavy fog, lingering, piercing through the carefully constructed walls of our family dynamic. The first few months of her marriage to my dad had been a whirlwind of clashing emotions and awkward tries at affection. I remember my dad's hopeful smile when he introduced her to me. Part of me wanted to return that smile, wanted to embrace some version of a life where everything felt united once more. But another part, the louder, more stubborn part, stayed rooted in the past, clinging fiercely to memories of my mother. She was the soft voice that soothed my scrapes, the gentle hand that braided my hair before school. Linda seemed, well, different. It wasn't just her name or the clothes she wore, but the very essence of her spirit that stung with discomfort. I hated how right my father was about her. They seemed to fit together like a puzzle piece that didn't belong in the box where my mother once ruled. That day when I stood in the kitchen, silence draping over us like a shroud, I wanted to scream. Instead, I felt an overwhelming need to be brutally honest. I wish I had chosen my words with more care. Maybe if I had couched my feelings in softer tones, we could have sidestepped the devastation that washed across her face. She didn't say anything at first. After what felt like an eternity, she took a deep breath, almost like she was trying to hold back a wave threatening to crash. "I didn't expect to be," she finally replied, her voice breaking slightly, and I immediately felt the heat of regret coat my cheeks. Even at that moment, I could see how deeply this hurt her, wounds colliding in a chaotic dance of raw honesty and heartache. I wanted to reach out. I wanted to hug her and confirm that my heart was in a whirlpool, too. Yet, I felt trapped between my loyalty to my mother's memory and the reality that Linda was trying her best to step into a role she never asked for. How could I reconcile those feelings? The days that followed were heavy, dinner felt tense, silence punctuated our conversations, and I often caught my dad looking back and forth between us like a tennis match. Linda would make an effort, cooking meals with recipes she picked up from my mom's old cookbooks, but I could see that my smile wasn't what she was hoping for. I felt like a walking contradiction. I loved my dad and wanted him to be happy, I wanted to thrive in this new reality, yet I resisted every attempt Linda made, seeing each one as an encroachment on our shared past. After the rough patches, I began to think of all the small moments, the way she laughed easily at Dad's dad jokes, the way she'd gently tease him about his terrible dance moves. It made me search for the good, the genuine attempt to bond. The only way I could make sense of the situation was by journaling, pouring out my confusion and anger onto the pages nightly, letting my thoughts run wild before they bundled into knots of resentment in my chest. It was therapeutic, though sometimes heavy. I penned my memories with my mom, sketched out the ways I still missed her. I also started to write about the moments with Linda that didn't feel so bad, almost like building a scrapbook of feelings I could revisit any time I wavered. The day finally came when I saw Linda sitting alone on the back porch, a cup of tea untouched against the cooling wood. Every part of me hesitated to join her, unsure of how to breach what felt like a chasm that had formed between us. But that little voice inside nudged me, encouraging me to be brave. Taking a deep breath, I stepped outside. "Hey, is this seat taken?" I asked, the words barely more than a whisper. She looked up, surprise etched on her face. "No, it's all yours." We sat in silence for a moment, both of us tracing the outline of our thoughts in the air between us. Finally, I spoke, "I'm sorry about what I said the other day. I didn't mean to hurt you." She turned to me, her eyes shimmering in the soft light, and for the first time, I noticed the vulnerability behind her usual confidence. "I know you didn't. I think we're both trying to figure this out." And there it was, an acknowledgement of the shared struggle, the complexities of our new reality. In that moment, it felt less like a betrayal to my mother's memory and something that might grow. Something new. It began to dawn on me that it was okay to have space in my heart for both Linda and my memories of my mom. Tension still hung in our home like an ever-present guest, but we were learning, piece by piece, how to alter our rhythms into something that did not erase but enhanced. I could let my past stand beside my present. Maybe I'd never call Linda Mom, but I could give her a chance to be something else, a figure carved from shared struggles and burgeoning affection. Every step forward felt tentative, but it was direction. Because sometimes, in the messiness of family bonds, honesty transforms into understanding, and hope quietly takes root. It may not be simple, but amidst the chaos, a soft light flickered, reminding me that the journey is what shapes us. And while I don't have all the answers yet, I know we're figuring it out together, and that has to count for something. But the path towards that flickering light wasn't straight, far from it, actually. Just last week, I found myself seated at the kitchen table, the two of us sharing a dinner that felt far too formal, like we were actors in a play neither of us signed up for. Linda had cooked a lasagna, my mom's recipe, the way she used to make it, with layers of cheese that melted together harmoniously. It tasted almost right, but every bite sent me spiraling back to memories of a time when family dinners felt whole. Chewing was just a cover for my thoughts, and when Linda leaned forward, her plate halfway to her lips, I braced for impact. "You used to love your mom's lasagna," she said, the corners of her mouth betraying a hopeful smile. It wasn't the first time she'd tried to nudge open that door, and my stomach twisted. I blinked hard, feeling this chasm that was all at once shrinking but still wouldn't budge. "Yeah, I did," I replied, trying to keep my tone even. "Maybe we can," she started, but I cut her off. It doesn't feel the same now," I admitted, the words slipping out like shards. Regret washed over me immediately, but Linda hardly flinched. Instead, her eyes softened, and for a moment, I recognized that flicker of understanding. "I know it doesn't, and I'm not trying to replace her," she said quietly, her voice almost breaking. "I miss her, too." It struck me then how odd and beautiful grief can be, a shared experience even between people who should feel worlds apart. My heart tightened, the anger ebbing away, and I realized that we were in the same storm, even if we had different boats. As we navigated those choppy waters, I was surprised to find my guard lowering just a fraction. The tension didn't dissolve, but it transformed, taking on a shape that felt less like hostility and more like something unforeseen. We exchanged stories, her memories of my mom as a stubborn friend, mine as the guiding light in my life. It somehow built bridges over that chasm, filling in the gaps with laughter and remembrance that felt less like an intrusion and more like a tribute. A week later, she asked if I wanted to go to the local farmer's market with her. I hesitated, panic gripped my insides. Was I actually considering spending more time with her? But there was a twinkle in her eye that day, reflecting genuine excitement, and for the first time, I thought maybe it wouldn't hurt to try. "Sure," I replied, The word feeling like it was floating between us, fragile yet full of promise. That morning, we walked side by side under the bright sun, the air rich with the scent of fresh produce, and I remember stopping at a stall overflowing with vibrant flowers. Linda picked out a bundle of sunflowers, her fingers brushing against mine as she handed them to me. "They reminded me of you," she said simply, as if it was normal. "Bright and standing tall." Those words lingered long after that day, threading through the tapestry of our evolving relationship. It wasn't a miracle, but it was a start. I still grappled with feelings of guilt and nostalgia, moments when I'd catch myself longing for that call I could no longer make, a habit of retreating into the secure arms of memory. But every shared moment with Linda peeled away a layer of that discomfort, revealing something underneath, a tentative friendship. As I sit here now, reflecting on all of this, I realize I still don't call her mom. It doesn't feel right, it's too soon, maybe too far-fetched. But there's a warmth that blooms between us, something that still requires nurturing. I've come to appreciate Linda's attempts, and maybe she's come to understand the delicate dance of love and loss that I walk each day. There's room for this new identity we've crafted together, a designation that doesn't aim to erase my past but lifts it up with a new light. So here we are, standing on the edge of something uncharted yet familiar, where understanding begins to bloom in the cracks of our shared experience. And while it's still messy, I'm learning to accept the imperfections and embrace this journey together, one sunflower at a time. I never thought that my home-cooked meals would become a point of contention, especially when it came to my boyfriend's kids. When I first met Jake, he mentioned he had 2 children, and I braced myself for the whirlwind that would follow. But I didn't expect to fall in love with their chaotic energy. They were just 10 and 14, and while I found their quirks endearing, I was constantly reminded that they were also master negotiators, especially when it came to mealtime. It all came to a head one Sunday evening when I decided to whip up a hearty vegetable stir-fry. I'd spent a good 2 hours chopping veggies, prepping rice, and stirring in a homemade sauce, humming happily to my playlist as I filled the kitchen with mouth-watering aromas. When I set the table, I felt a sense of pride. Jake's kids, however, traipsed in and paused as if I had served them something alive. "What's that?" The younger one, Lily, wrinkled her nose. "Ew, I'm not eating that." The older one, Ben, joined in. "Yeah, can we just order pizza instead?" My heart sank. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that this was a new family dynamic, and kids have a knack for testing boundaries. "Guys, I really put a lot of effort into this, and it's what's for dinner. You can eat it, or if you're not hungry, that's okay too." My voice was calm, but internally, I wrestled with a potential backlash. There was a powerful silence, thick with disbelief. I felt the stakes rise as they exchanged glances, confusion and defiance dancing in their eyes. "But it's gross," Lily protested, sinking into her chair with arms crossed. Anger flared up in me. Was I supposed to cater to their every whim? I felt a wave of frustration as their protests grew louder, but I forced myself to stay grounded. "Look," I said, trying to keep my tone steady, "I get that it's not your favorite, but you're old enough to try new things. How about just one bite? You can always have dessert afterward." The quiet stretched. I was ready to crack if they kept it up. The moment felt critical, like a lit fuse that could either fizzle out or explode. Finally, Jake stepped in, looking concerned as Ben and Lily glared at me. "Hey, lifelong battle with vegetables aside, can we at least try to support each other?" he said, trying to lighten the moment. With dramatic sighs that could shatter glass, they slid their forks into the stir-fry, which I must admit looked inviting enough. As they reluctantly chewed, I could see them grimace, but something unexpected happened next. Ben declared it almost edible, while Lily muttered that she could tolerate it if it meant dessert. We ended on a humorous note, and as the dinner progressed, I found myself laughing alongside them, the earlier tension dissipating. However, the aftermath gnawed at me. Had I overstepped a boundary? Was I that tyrannical figure in their lives that made mealtimes a game of compliance? Later, after I tucked the kids in, Jake brought up our earlier standoff gently, his hand warming my back. "I think you handled it well for a first time," he said. "It takes time for them to accept a new routine, you know?" I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Although I felt uncertain, a part of me appreciated that I stood my ground in an unfamiliar parenting territory. Sometimes cooking for a family is more than putting food on the table, it's about navigating new personalities and expectations. If I ever end up becoming a real part of their lives, I would need to find that balance, between discipline, understanding, and letting them choose their battles. I'd like to think I'm on the right track, I might even try another stir-fry next week, but not without a little prep work and maybe a fun cooking session with them beforehand. I'd want them on board, not just as a meal plan but as part of this crazy family journey we were on together. As I sat at the kitchen table, the remnants of last night's stir-fry still lingering in my mind, I couldn't shake off the feeling of uncertainty about how to move forward. The whole idea of being with someone who had kids was both exhilarating and daunting. I tried to visualize family meals as these blissful moments, laughter ricocheting off the walls, but in reality, I had clashed with Chris's kids over food more often than I'd care to admit. 11-year-old Ava had her heart set on pizza, the classic kid's choice, while her younger brother, Max, preferred nothing but chicken nuggets. And so, standing at the stove last night, chopping broccoli and bell peppers, I felt my resolve wane. Eat what's for dinner or don't eat at all, I'd said, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders like a heavy blanket. The words had slipped from my mouth before I could catch them, a hardline stance that resonated into the silence of the kitchen, slicing through any chance of warmth. I understood it was unrealistic to expect them to embrace my culinary enthusiasm overnight. I thought about it long after dinner, my stomach heavy with the green beans I'd forced myself to eat, and I just couldn't shake that gnawing regret. Had I been too harsh? I would define my approach as teaching them to appreciate food, but in what way had I truly connected with them? After they had left the table, I contemplated the gap that had formed. Chris had tried to mitigate the situation, reassuring them and promising pizza tomorrow while sending me a poignant look, part apology and part "what were you thinking?" I understood he was in a tricky position, caught between his partner and his kids. That moment of clash weighed heavily, not just in the context of dinner but in the greater effort of blending our lives. I loved Chris, and I could see why this family meant the world to him, but after our first big rocky dinner together, I felt more like a bumbling intruder than a partner. The truth nagged at me, I craved connection, not confrontation. The shimmering vision of us coming together over a shared meal felt threatened by my own missteps. Were my expectations too high? I could sense my friends' voices echoing in my mind, suggesting a more lenient path, one that allowed kids to express their preferences without feeling bullied by adult tastes. I mulled over the idea of a pre-dinner meeting, a vote, perhaps? Pizza, stir-fry, or even tacos? I could picture the kids researching together, scrolling through recipes, maybe even sharing their wild ideas with me while chuckling over imagined concoctions. The next day, as the sun peeked through the kitchen window and spilled onto the counter, I took a deep breath and texted Chris. "Can we set a family dinner meeting tonight? I think it could be fun. Just the kids and us, no pressure." To my relief, he responded almost immediately. "Sure. I think they'll love it." I felt hope flutter within me as we assembled that evening around the kitchen table, the atmosphere different already, with art supplies scattered across one side as a backdrop to our conversation. "Okay, team, before we plan our dinner, how was your day?" I asked, trying to start light. Max was engrossed in his drawing, which was surprisingly good, while Ava had found a way to channel her impatience into a few clever comments about vegetables being growing food. We talked and laughed, and slowly I noticed a change in our dynamics. When I suggested we had to make a plan for the week, they didn't immediately groan. Instead, Ava perked up, saying, "Can we have taco night? We can make them." And just like that, the children were engaged. They reveled in the idea of crafting their own tacos, discussing toppings, and experimenting with what they'd like to adorn this new creation. I felt a warmth bloom in my chest, that elusive sensation of family forming the way broth warms soup. I took a step back and decided to let them lead. After all, cooking was a journey, not a destination. Dinner rolled around the next week, and together we peeled avocados, shredded cheese, and dashed spices back and forth like our own culinary dance, the kitchen buzzing with chatter and laughter. Chris must have felt the shift too because his smile spanned ear to ear as he watched the three of us concoct our masterpieces. That night, not only did we eat together, but we also forged a deeper sense of understanding. As I watched Max carefully pile his toppings, his face a mix of concentration and delight, I realized this was more than just about making meals. This was about making memories, bridging experiences, and, hopefully, inviting them into my world just as they welcomed me into theirs. A week later, while we all sat on the couch, the remnants of dinner still wafting through the air, Ava turned to me and asked shyly, "Can we try that stir-fry again next week?" I chuckled, knowing she had probably come to accept that sometimes we have to eat things we might not prefer. "Absolutely, if we can do it together," I replied, feeling a soothing sense of victory wash over me. As I leaned back and heard their laughter fill the room, I finally recognized the beauty in our shared chaos, a family finding its rhythm, with all its flavors, challenges, and laughter. The journey ahead, filled with learning and experimenting, felt like the perfect adventure. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had crossed a threshold together, from mere coexistence into a budding family dynamic that was starting to feel genuine. Each evening, the dinner table became more than just a place to eat, it transformed into a communal hub of laughter, arguments over whether to have chicken nuggets or homemade tacos, and surprisingly deep conversations about their day. I found myself cherishing the little moments, the way Oliver would scrunch his face at broccoli but listen while I told him about how important it was for his growing body, or the way Ava started to try new foods, albeit slowly, but it felt like small victories on this journey of culinary diplomacy. One particular Saturday, we took my idea of a cooking session and made it a whole event. I took them to the local market, and it was incredible to see their eyes light up at the array of colors, bright red tomatoes, vibrant orange peppers, and greens that looked like they belonged in a painting. The way they picked out their favorite ingredients to create our next family meal made me feel like we were all inches closer to blending our lives. The joy wasn't just in the act of cooking, it was in each tiny choice they made, how their personalities shone through. As we prepped dinner that night, laughter echoed along with the clattering of pots and pans. There was flour everywhere. Ava had managed to get some on her nose, and even Oliver, who had once been wholly indifferent toward helping, had a spatula in hand, flipping pancakes with a kind of determination that made me proud. I wanted to capture that moment forever, the three of us dancing around the kitchen like we owned the place. As we sat down together with plates filled with pancakes drizzled with syrup and fresh fruit, the atmosphere was warm and inviting. My heart felt full. Yet, amidst the laughter and antics, something did gnaw at me. I was reminded of that initial conflict. Should I have been firmer with my expectations? It danced in the back of my mind like an uninvited guest. I recalled the times I made comments about their choices or pushed them to embrace something they initially refused. I wondered if I was setting them up for failure in adapting to a household that didn't bend to their every whim. I let it linger in my thoughts, willing to explore the line between being a nurturer and a figure of authority. But every smile from them, every bit of that sincere joy we created together felt like an affirming hug around my doubts. That upcoming week, we tried the stir-fry together. They didn't just help, they took ownership. Ava insisted on chopping the vegetables, creating little shapes out of the bell peppers like they were pieces of art, and Oliver surprised us all by deciding he wanted his pieces a bit bigger because, in his words, everything tastes better in massive bites. Watching them engage in our meal with excitement and investment settled something deep within me, the realization that as challenging as it might be to find the right balance, it was also utterly rewarding. I felt like I was gaining not just their trust, but a glimpse into how our little family was beginning to develop our rhythm, a rhythm that celebrated our mismatched notes as much as the harmonies we found along the way. Fast forward to a sunny Sunday a few weeks later, and I found myself standing in our kitchen, a vibrant smell wafting through the air as we prepared an extravagant dinner meant to celebrate the end of the week. After weeks of navigating some bumps and missteps, the kids still had their moments of pushback, but I had noticed they were beginning to voice their preferences more constructively. As I was stirring a pot, Ava casually shared how she appreciated being listened to during our cooking sessions. Oliver chimed in that he liked knowing he could suggest things without judgment. It hit me harder than I expected. Here, amidst the flour and chopping boards, we were building something real. Reflecting on it later that night, I realized I had been questioning myself an awful lot. What age do you cross from merely being a parent figure to someone they could genuinely trust? The love I felt for those two kids grew each day, and the connection we forged deepened beautifully. Maybe, just maybe, family really is about creating a safe space, where all the flavors are welcome, where every spice has its purpose. I laid in bed that night, the remnants of laughter still echoing in my mind and warmth radiating from my heart, and for the first time, I believed we were truly becoming what I had always imagined we'd be, a family. I never thought I'd find myself in this situation, but here I am, staring at my new tattoo, not sure if I'm the hero or the villain of my own story. For the last 2 years, my boyfriend, Jake, and I had been living hand in hand, going through the ups and downs of life together in our tiny one-bedroom apartment. He's the kind of guy who dreams big, and I've always loved that about him. His ambition fuels my own. We talked about engagement frequently, and while I wasn't nagging him, I was starting to feel that itch for a ring that we had sort of agreed on. So, after almost a year of saving up, I had stashed away about $1,000, earmarked specifically for a beautiful engagement ring I had seen in a local shop. The plan was to keep saving until I had enough to take him out to dinner, drop down on one knee, and ask him to be my forever. But then, life happened. Just a few weeks ago, the itch for something permanent became too strong. I had always dreamed of getting a tattoo to commemorate a moment in my life, but never found the right time or design until a sudden burst of inspiration hit me. I wanted to capture a symbol of our journey together, something that could feel like both a celebration and a mark of our commitment. So, on a whim, I walked into a tattoo parlor and dropped that $1,000 on an intricate design of a compass, where we each planned to add our initials to signify that we were each other's direction. The moment the needle hit my skin, I felt exhilarated, a rush that pushed aside any guilt I might have felt. Yet, once the high faded, the guilt settled in heavy. I started envisioning Jake's face when he'd find out, and the thought gnawed at me for days. I could see the disappointment brewing in his eyes, could imagine the way his mouth would drop open slightly in disbelief. When I finally confessed after dinner one night, it didn't go as smoothly as I had hoped. His expression went from confusion to frustration, and he snapped out of it with, "You spent our ring money? On a tattoo? Seriously?" It felt like a punch to the gut. As the words hung in the air, I tried to explain my thought process, how this felt like something I had needed for myself in that moment, but he just shook his head. "I just can't believe you chose a tattoo over the future we talked about." His tone was flat, and I felt every bit of anger and disappointment directed at me. I wanted to scream that it was more than just ink, it was a representation of everything we'd built together, but all he could see was the dollars and the broken promise. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wrestling with doubt. Part of me was excited about my tattoo, grateful for the way it reminded me of our love, but another part of me felt like I had just sabotaged the best thing I had ever had, the chance to build a life together with the person I adored. Days turned into a week, and the space between us began to feel like an echo of things left unsaid. I wanted to give him time to process, but I also felt the gnawing uncertainty. Had I ruined everything? Did I prioritize a fleeting moment over a lasting commitment? In the end, we had a long conversation a few days later, and Jake surprised me. He admitted he understood my need for self-expression and how significant it was for me, but he still felt cheated out of a moment that meant so much to him. In that moment, I promised him that I'd take on extra shifts to help us save up again for the ring. We both needed to blend our dreams together instead of letting diverging paths fracture the love we had. So, we're still together, still saving, just with a compass tattoo on my forearm and a shared resolve to navigate our way forward. Looking back, I hope I made the right choice, but I guess that's something we're both figuring out together. As I reflect on that moment, lying in bed with the weight of my decision still settling in my heart, I realize how fragile our dreams can feel. The tattoo, a simple compass, represents more than my desire for adventure and my love for the sea. It captures the essence of us, two people charting a course through life, not always aligned on every detail, but willing to navigate the waves together. The next few weeks were a mix of bittersweet emotions. I took on as many extra shifts as I could manage at the cafe, pouring coffee and exchanging pleasantries with customers while my mind often drifted back to the conversation I had with Matt, where he expressed his disappointment so genuinely. Each night, exhausted after long hours, I'd come home to find him nestled on the couch, usually with takeout containers cluttering the coffee table. His face would light up when I walked in, and I'd pretend those little moments, filled with warmth and kindness, were enough to erase the tension from before. One Saturday morning, as I served him pancakes topped with strawberries, I noticed the shadows under his eyes slowly fading. He seemed lighter, and I thought maybe the tattoo had struck a chord with him too. "You know," he said between bites, "it's not just about the ring, right? It's what it symbolizes for us." His gaze was steady, and I felt a rush of warmth realizing we were rebuilding our dreams, step by step. The conversation lingered with me, swirling in my mind through the afternoon as I painted my nails, gazing at the compass. I had adorned a symbol of our navigation, yet I couldn't shake the feeling of insecurity that nestled just beneath the surface. I started wondering if I'd ever really be able to save for that ring again. But as weeks turned into months, our shared compromise began to feel like a shared bond. We spoke about potential timelines, future plans, and the kind of life we wanted to build. None of that felt rushed, but rather infused with mutual respect. Matt confided one evening about his own dreams to travel, revealing a longing I hadn't fully seen before. "How about we save for a trip instead? Just you and me, on our own adventure," he said, an expectant grin spread across his face. There was something exhilarating about the idea, pulling us from societal expectations into a realm we could mold together. So, We changed trajectories again, setting aside the engagement ring talk for the moment, focusing instead on our travel fund. The tattoo became an anchor of sorts, reminding us to always return to our true north. It marked a chapter in our relationship, a beautiful reminder of the moment we chose communication over disappointment. Every time I glanced at it, that little compass invoked the promise of exploration, encouraging us to seek out new paths where dreams intertwined. Life moved forward like that, simple yet filled with the unexpected joys of our daily rhythms. Still, a part of me wrestled with the ghost of that elusive engagement ring, now a distant wish rather than an immediate goal. Was I selfish for prioritizing my desires over his expectations? I often questioned it, but then I'd see the look in Matt's eyes when we planned our travel itinerary, the spark of excitement that reminded me that we were figuring this out as we went. Eventually, we took our first trip together, the result of a few months of meticulous budgeting and shared late-night planning sessions that felt far more rewarding than simply swiping a card for impulse buys. As we trekked through the hills of a quaint little town filled with art and adventure, I felt an overwhelming sense of fulfillment wash over me. We hiked to a viewpoint one evening, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, I could see in Matt's gaze something deeper than our previous expectations. "You know," he whispered, "if we ever do get engaged, it'll be because we've made this journey together." I nodded, realizing that this path felt right, even if it was not the one I initially thought I was meant to take. The uncertainty still lingered, but it felt safe nestled beside his confidence in our partnership. Now, as I sit here recounting this experience, that small compass on my forearm feels less like a marker of a choice I made on a whim and more like a testament to the beauty of navigating life together. I hope we're making all the right choices, but even if we stumble along the way, I know we'll figure it out side by side. That promise alone is worth more than any ring ever could be. I can't help but smile whenever I catch a glimpse of that compass, its lines etched in ink, a little reminder of the journey we're on. It's funny how something that started as a spontaneous decision transformed into a symbol of our bond. Through countless conversations over takeout dinners and quiet evenings on our cramped couch, it became evident that this wasn't just about the ring or the tattoo, it was about us redefining what commitment truly meant. Sure, there were moments filled with tension. I could still see the flicker of disappointment in Daniel's eyes each time I pulled up my sleeve, revealing my new ink. It wasn't reluctance he felt, it was the shadow of expectations, the weight of what he had imagined for us. But then there were also shared smiles, laughter bubbling up over iced coffee as we scrolled through engagement ring designs online. We increasingly found ourselves dreaming instead about adventures, discussing places we wanted to explore, and traditions we wanted to create. There's something about pooling dreams together that made the prospect of marriage feel closer, more tangible. I even joked that maybe we could just stamp passports with our love story instead of just fingers adorned with gold. Daniel laughed, his brows raised. It was a silly notion, but it was mine, a glimpse into my heart reaching out to him. Weeks turned into months, and while I continued to take on extra shifts, we also began mapping out our game plan. What if we saved just a little more for a trip next summer? I proposed one evening as we spread out a world map on the floor, filled with pinned locations and scribbled notes. To my delight, he spotted a little island off the coast of Thailand, and he was enthralled. We could watch the sunrise from the beach, just us and the horizon, he said, eyes sparkling, and in that moment, I saw not just a vision but a promise, a different kind of engagement. But there were still doubts that crept in like unwelcome guests. What if we never made it to that ring? What if life took us down a path that wasn't supposed to include marriage? I often found myself oscillating between exhilaration for the adventure we were shaping and fear that, in the end, it wouldn't be enough. So, I shared these misgivings with Daniel one night. Sitting by our flickering living room lamp, I admitted how I feared being seen as the one who diverted our course, the root of any uncertainty that lay ahead. What if you wanted that ring more than anything, and I've messed it all up? The vulnerability of my confession hung in the air, settling deep within us both. He took my hand, his touch steady and reassuring. You didn't mess anything up. We're being real about what we want, and that's powerful. Sometimes it's okay to step outside the script we've been given and write our own. His words washed over me, soothing the anxiety that had coiled tightly in my chest. In many ways, that moment defined our relationship. It was about honoring each other's dreams without losing sight of our own. As time passed, that tattoo began to feel more like home to me, a compass pointing towards our aspirations, guiding us forward in harmony. Each time I felt lost or anxious, I'd glance at my forearm as if the compass were whispering that I was on the right path. And so we continued our journey, both separately chasing individual dreams and together weaving a shared tapestry of experiences we could cherish. Life was unpredictable, but we embraced it, aware that every twist and turn only deepened our connection. In the end, as our next anniversary approached, we decided to take a staycation, just an escape into each other's company without the weight of the world pressing upon us. I couldn't help but wonder what the future had in store. Would we still be dreaming of that ring next year? Would we even want it anymore? We were slowly rewriting what love and commitment meant to us, and isn't that what truly matters? I realize now that life isn't about perfect paths, it's about the journey we carve out, and I'm grateful for every bump along the road, tattooed compass and all. I still can't say for sure whether deferring the ring was the right choice, but I often see the compass as a metaphor for us, navigating together, steering clear of the shallow and unnecessary, and embracing the depth of our evolving love story. Maybe it's okay not to have all the answers right now. I trust that with Daniel by my side, every step we take will be a step worth taking, each choice reflecting who we truly are, together. I never thought I'd be the one to put my foot down in our friend group, but here I am, standing on a precipice of sorts, caught between loyalty and discomfort. I'm Sarah, and I've been friends with Mike, Jess, and Clara for over a decade, since our awkward high school days. We've shared everything from triumphs to heartbreaks, always finding solace in each other's company, until house rules turned the company into a battlefield. It all started when we began hanging out at Mike's place more frequently. At first, it felt like an extension of our usual get-togethers, filled with laughter and shared snacks. But then, as the weeks turned to months, I started noticing little things, the strict silence during movie nights unless you had a comment worthy of praise, the way he would glance at his watch if someone went over their allowed time in the bathroom, and the unsolicited critique of how my coffee preference was too frivolous for an adult. It bugged me more than I wanted to admit, but I convinced myself it was just his quirk, something we could laugh about later. However, as the restrictions mounted, no arguing over board games, no using your phone unless it was for him, I began to see the cracks in our camaraderie. Jess and Clara were as uncomfortable as I was. I remember one night, sitting on the sagging couch, the air thick with tension as Mike launched into another diatribe about etiquette, and I felt my heart racing. After a particularly stifling evening, I brought it up to the group. "Do you think we should say something?" I asked, my voice carrying a hint of hesitance. Clara chewed her lip, glancing at Jess, who nodded slowly. We weren't mad at Mike for being himself, we just didn't want to live under a magnifying glass that forced us to tiptoe through every gathering. That's when I suggested we take a break from his house, for our own sanity, really. It's not about excluding him, it's about preserving what we've built together, I argued. They agreed, albeit hesitantly, and we decided to meet at Jess's place instead. The first time we did it, there was a relief that washed over us like an unexpected breeze. We chatted freely, erupted in laughter without checking the clock, and the pulse of our friendship returned. But, of course, Mike found out. I still remember the way his face twisted when he confronted me, hurt spilling out of his eyes like an open wound. "So, you don't want to hang out at my place anymore?" he asked incredulously, and I felt the guilt creep in. "It's not that, it's just..." I stumbled, realizing how fragile friendships can be. Our conversations became a series of circular debates after that, like two opposing trains on the same track. I didn't want to hurt him but felt compelled to stand my ground. Over the weeks that followed, the group dynamic shifted. While Jess and Clara enjoyed the newfound freedom, I found myself stuck in a loop of guilt and worry. What if we ended up pushing him away entirely? That thought haunted me, casting a shadow over our fun times. We tried inviting him to join us, but he'd show up with an attitude, it was just off. Little jabs, remarks about our advanced carefree spirit, and things that made it clear he was petulant over our decision. I wanted to talk him into understanding that it wasn't about him, it was about the environment. Yet, every time I opened my mouth, words felt inadequate. The tension simmered like a pot on the verge of boiling over. Some nights, lying in bed, I thought about how friendships evolve. I wondered if I had crossed a line, whether I truly was the asshole. In my heart, I wanted to say no, I believed compromise is part of any relationship, but I never had the guts to confront Mike again, fearing it would unravel the fragile thread holding us together. Looking back now, I realize it took months of distance for us to finally communicate properly. We met up again for coffee, at a neutral spot because the house rule debates just got way too heavy, but this time, the walls were down. We could finally talk about how our friendship had changed without the pressure of the rigid rules. There was still hurt, okay, a lot of hurt, but also a willingness to listen. We discussed boundaries, about what felt comfortable, and, strangely enough, Mike confessed how much he feared being left out. Somehow, through all the misunderstandings, we found common ground. It's a messy process, friendships, but I think we're on the way back to being whole again, or at least learning how to navigate this new chapter together. One thing's for sure, though, I'd never advocate for ghosting a friend over house rules again. As I sit here reflecting on all that's happened, the weight of that weekend is still with me, heavy yet oddly uplifting. I thought letting go of the rigid house rules would lead us to a happier place, but seeing how it unraveled initially had me questioning my instincts. The truth is, Mike's home had always been our sanctuary, a gathering spot where laughter echoed late into the night. But it was also a space where unspoken tension lingered, hovering above us like a dark cloud just waiting to rain. When I encouraged the group to rethink our visits, stating that the rules about food and drinks, even how we talked around certain topics, were stifling, I felt more like a provocateur than a friend trying to protect our dynamic. When we finally confronted Mike together, it felt like peeling back layers we'd been adding to ourselves over the years. Words flowed as we sat in the living room, the familiar walls lined with photos of memories that now felt tainted by our recent rifts. I watched as Mike's face shifted from hurt to confusion and then slowly to realization. I could see that we weren't just addressing rules, we were unpacking insecurities and meticulously wrapping each other in empathy. The feeling of isolation I'd sensed in him, an atmosphere thick enough to choke on, dissolved into light when he shared that he feared being left out, that he'd built those rules as a safeguard but had instead trapped himself in us. When we spoke about boundaries, I felt a sense of catharsis. It was remarkably humbling to see Mike's vulnerability wash over him like a tide, and I reflected on how often I'd felt the same dread of being uninvited or merely ignored. There was a rawness to those conversations that left us breathless, yet relieved in an odd way, like a storm finally clearing. One by one, we shared our own burdens, the little things that built up over time, creating resentment. A sense of understanding formed between us, like an invisible bond tightening with each confession. By the end of our heart-to-heart, we dismantled the fear-based structure of our friendship to make room for something more authentic. Though there was still a long way to go, hurts can be stubborn like weeds in a garden, we promised to work through them together, to navigate this way forward like a group of explorers hunting for new paths in familiar woods. I might not have all the answers, but one thing became abundantly clear: I didn't want to lose our connection over something so fundamental as house rules, which, when you peel back the layers, stemmed from fears both spoken and unspoken. As I look back now, I feel relieved that we could transform dysfunction into an opportunity for deeper bonds. It reminded me that friendships are messy, yes, but they're ours to cultivate. I learned that conversation is the best fertilizer we could provide, nurturing dialogue until we were finally comfortable sitting together in silence again, knowing we'd chosen each other, rules or no rules. Life has a way of teaching lessons when you least expect it. Beyond the surface issues, we unearth deeper truths about ourselves and one another that I think will keep us anchored through whatever storms lie ahead. As I look back now, I feel relieved that we could transform dysfunction into an opportunity for deeper bonds. It reminded me that friendships are messy, yes, but they're ours to cultivate. I learned that conversation is the best fertilizer we could provide, nurturing dialogue until we were finally comfortable sitting together in silence again, knowing we'd chosen each other, rules or no rules. Life has a way of teaching lessons when you least expect it. Beyond the surface issues, we unearth deeper truths about ourselves and one another that I think will keep us anchored through whatever storms lie ahead. One evening, as we gathered at the park, the sun dipping low behind the trees, casting golden rays over our small assembly of blankets and snacks, I could hear their laughter, a sound that had felt distant for so long. There was a lightness in the air, a tangible ease, and for a moment, I let myself be fully present, breathing it all in. As we passed around a shared bowl of popcorn, Mike looked around and broke the comfortable silence. "You know," he said, tossing a kernel into his mouth, "I had this idea that all of you were ganging up on me when you started coming over less often. I thought I was the nuisance." His laughter was half-hearted, but it kicked off a cascading effect, each of us nodding along as we revealed our own misunderstandings, our own doubts that had turned into insecurities. It turned into a revelation, a realization that we were all human, each guarding things that shouldn't be bottled up. I remember feeling a swell of gratitude wash over me, realizing that this group could survive the rough patches, that we could be honest without fear of judgment. It felt oddly cathartic, acknowledging those feelings rather than letting them fester. Then Christine, who had been mostly quiet, chimed in with a shaky but determined voice, "We've all felt anxious about something, haven't we? Whether it's about being too clingy, or feeling like we don't belong." The honesty hung in the air, a unifying thread that wove us closer. I saw lighter sparks in their eyes, each of us willing to step outside our comfort zones for the sake of our friendship. I felt lighter too. Maybe this was how growth looked, sometimes jagged, sometimes beautiful. The next week, we organized a board game night, a perfect excuse to hang out without the shadows of rules hanging overhead. We laughed, we argued over game pieces, and at one point, Mike playfully accused me of cheating, but instead of letting it spiral into an argument, I laughed it off. Okay, guilty as charged. Then we both burst into laughter, and it felt like every uncomfortable moment from the previous weeks had burned away, just smoke dissipating into the night sky. I packed my things to leave that evening, and as we said our goodbyes, I felt a genuine warmth. We shared a group hug, an unspoken agreement that we'd keep fighting for this thing we had, however imperfect. I hoped we'd learn to communicate enough that no one felt left out or diminished again. As I walked back home, under a blanket of stars, I smiled at the thought of what we'd built, a bridge over a tumultuous river instead of letting it swallow us whole. Life might throw more storms our way, but now at least, we had boats together. I resolved to never forget that conversation is magic. And in a world where people often ghost each other over differences, we chose connection instead. As I settled into bed that night, I felt something bittersweet creeping in, an acknowledgement that while we had made progress, we were still a work in progress ourselves. But maybe that was okay, too. We'd navigate this new chapter together, collected not as perfect friends but as imperfect allies in this life, and I was more grateful than ever to be on this journey with them. I never thought asking my friend to bring her own food would turn into such a big deal. But here we are. You see, I live in a small studio apartment that I love dearly, but my budget is tighter than my jeans after the holidays. My friend Emma and I have known each other for years. We met in college, bonded over shared lunches in the cafeteria, her expertly crafted avocado toast against my questionable attempts at repurposing leftover pizza. We had a rhythm, you know? We'd swap meals and recipes without a second thought, but fast forward to today, and the stakes feel different. When Emma texted me last week asking to come over, I felt a surge of excitement, followed by that familiar pang of anxiety about dinner. My cupboards had become depressingly bare. An empty fridge greeted me each time I opened it, which was a stark contrast to the last few years when I had a solid stock of ingredients. I quickly realized that it wouldn't be fair to expect her to feast on my sad assortment of condiments and a wilted cucumber. So, sheepishly, I sent her a text with a suggestion. "Hey. Love to have you over. Would you mind bringing something to munch on?" As soon as I hit send, a knot twisted in my stomach. Was I being rude? I shook my head, trying to dismiss the nagging thoughts that followed. I wasn't trying to be stingy, just practical. But as the evening approached, I could feel my anxiety building. When she arrived, her expression was a mix of surprise and a hint of disappointment, and I immediately felt small. "You really asked me to bring food?" She laughed, her eyes slightly narrowed. It cut deep. "I just thought," I stammered, trying to make sense of my own reasoning, "I haven't had the chance to go grocery shopping this week." Creating a facade that everything was fine, I eached out for her usual laid-back demeanor, hoping it would lighten the mood. Instead, my home felt suddenly electric with tension. We settled on my tiny couch with a bowl of popcorn she had graciously brought. The crunches were too loud, filling the silence that stretched between us. I wanted to explain, to really convey my struggles, both financially and emotionally, but every attempt felt stunted, a half-formed thought getting lost in the noise of our moment. As we forced laughter while reminiscing about old times, I could sense that our dynamic had shifted slightly, and I wasn't sure how to mend it. After she left, I spent the rest of the night thinking about how trivial my request had been. Was I really the jerk for trying to be responsible, or had I crossed some invisible line in our friendship? Days turned into a week, and I'll admit, I was too cowardly to reach out. I thought about everything in a loop, replaying moments that I wished I had handled differently. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me, and I started drafting a post on a Reddit thread. My heart raced as the words poured out, sharing every doubt I had, every moment of joy and sorrow we'd experienced together. I anxiously awaited responses. To my surprise, the comments flooded in with empathy and understanding. "You're not an asshole, you're just being cautious," one user wrote. Their kind sentences soothed my worries a little, reminding me that I wasn't alone in navigating these awkward dynamics. A few days later, to my shock, Emma surprised me with a visit. This time, she showed up with a homemade pizza, not just any pizza, but one with toppings we used to argue about in school. We laughed until we cried over memories and bad ingredients, finally feeling like ourselves again amidst the melted cheese and gooey toppings. As we shared the meal, it occurred to me that this little hiccup wasn't a final verdict on our friendship. If anything, it opened the door for deeper honesty, that sometimes we need to be real about our situations, no matter how uncomfortable it feels. We talked it out, and it felt refreshing. I found comfort in her reassurance that there were no hard feelings. As I watched her eat, my heart softened more than I thought possible. I knew I still had a way to go with being open and vulnerable, learning to ask for help without shame, and recognizing the beauty of shared meals, no matter who brought the food. As we sat there, the warmth of the late afternoon sun spilling through my kitchen window, I couldn't help but reflect on how this little spat had shifted the ground beneath our feet. The table, now laden with an odd assortment of takeout containers and half-eaten dinners, felt transformed from a battleground into a sanctuary of sorts. As Sarah absent-mindedly picked at her fries, a mix of ketchup and ranch smeared across her plate, I felt grateful for her ability to laugh at the situation. "You know," she said between bites, "I could have easily been more upset. But in the grand scheme of things, it's just food." Her smile was genuine, but I knew there was a depth to it that hinted at her own struggles. I watched her, realizing that my discomfort had resonated with something deeper inside her as well. Maybe we both carried a little baggage that we had been hesitant to unpack. The conversation meandered from deep reflections on our friendship to lighter topics, like the hilarious antics of our mutual friends and the latest Netflix series we had been binging. With every joke, every shared look of amusement, I felt a layer of tension peel away. It was strange how vulnerability had become the unexpected glue holding our evening together, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this was a pivotal moment. For once, instead of clenching my fists over my own insecurities, I was loosening the grip and allowing acceptance into the cracks. As Sarah spoke about her recent promotion at work, animatedly detailing her new responsibilities, I took a moment to absorb what lay beneath the surface. It was evident she had been pushing herself hard, like all of us do in our quest for success, attaching her worth to her achievements. I had never really seen her in that light. We often navigated through life like two ships passing in the night, seldom hovering around each other's storms. "Hey, Sarah," I ventured, needing to bring up the elephant in the room again, about our food conversation. She raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "Yeah? What about it?" I hesitated, unsure if I really wanted to dip into the well of awkwardness again. But something compelled me forward. "I think it's important for both of us to feel comfortable sharing our situations with each other. I don't want you to feel like you can't come over because you're worried about food or finances. We're friends, right? We should share everything." She nodded slowly, and I could see her processing my words. "I appreciate that. Honestly, I've never thought about it like that before. I guess I assumed if I came over, I should contribute. But I would hate for either of us to feel burdened in our friendship, especially when we're just trying to be there for each other." And there it was, a booming truth echoing in my mind. In our world of social expectations, I had been clinging to the idea that self-sufficiency was the end goal, but maybe friendship was just a dance of give and take. I couldn't remember the last time we'd simply let down our guards and leaned into the beautiful chaos of sharing moments together without the need for pretense. After dinner, we decided to make the most of the evening. We wandered over to my balcony, the sunset painting the sky in a wash of oranges and pinks. We talked long into the night, our laughter mingling with the distant sounds of the city. For the first time, I felt the freedom of being wholly myself with her, unencumbered by the fear of judgment. I realized that by addressing our discomfort, we had forged a deeper connection than mere shared meals. We had unveiled the threads of honesty and support that we could weave into the fabric of our friendship. As she packed up the remaining food, I felt a lightness settling in my chest. We agreed to alternate cooking duties moving forward, a new tradition starting that night. I knew there would be challenges ahead. There would be more meals shared and, inevitably, more awkward conversations. But for the first time, it didn't feel like a daunting task. It felt like an invitation to grow. Life is messy, friendships are complex, and sometimes the most beautiful moments emerge from the chaos. And surprisingly, I found myself looking forward to what lay ahead, a journey built on authenticity, laughter, and perhaps, a shared plate of cold fries. As I watched her meticulously dissect the lasagna I had prepared, grateful but honest about its slightly undercooked noodles, I realized how essential these moments of vulnerability were. Our conversations meandered from the food we were sharing to the deeper questions nestled in our lives, dreams, fears, and hopes for the future. I learned that she had been feeling overwhelmed at work, juggling deadlines like a circus performer. With flaming torches. "Sometimes I just want to quit," she admitted between bites, her voice small as if admitting defeat. I could see the stress etched on her face, the corners of her mouth twitching downwards, and it stirred something deep inside me. We exchanged reassurances, her struggles reminded me of my own, and perhaps that was why I felt compelled to invite her in the first place. The sound of forks clinking against plates filled the quiet space between us, creating a rhythm that felt comforting, like the pulse of a warm heartbeat. I offered her a second slice, and she graciously accepted, saying something about needing all the sustenance she could get. As she dug in with genuine appreciation, I felt a sense of connection bloom, vibrant and alive between us. It was a revelation, right there, amidst the backdrop of my cozy, albeit cluttered kitchen. I discovered that sharing wasn't solely about the food. It was about the act of carving out time for each other, to savor not just the flavors but the stories that came with them. When the dishes were finally cleared away, we sat together on my couch, her laughter dancing like sunlight in the room, chasing away the shadows that had lingered too long in both our hearts. There was something ineffable about that evening. It felt like we had pierced through a veil of pretense, revealing the raw fabric of our friendship. I assured her we'd tackle the cooking duties equally, promising to bring my best every time, except for the cold fries incident. We both chuckled at that one. In the days that followed, there were more meal preparations, more invitations extended, and they were filled with the same laughter and vulnerability. We had created this little sanctuary of openness where the awkwardness of our past discussions had transformed into playful banter, a dance of sharing rather than a struggle. My heart felt buoyant as I navigated through these moments, slowly shedding the layers that had covered me like an unwieldy blanket. I began to realize that friendships are indeed a living, breathing thing. They require nourishment, like the meals we prepared together. As we took turns hosting, sometimes we cooked, other times we ordered in, and occasionally we compromised with a bowl of cereal and mismatched utensils. Each gathering cemented our bond further. Gradually, I learned to voice my feelings without fear, sharing my insecurities, my worries, and yes, even my cravings. There was something beautifully symbiotic about this arrangement, creating space for both of us to express our needs honestly. One evening, as we sat surrounded by half-empty pizza boxes and laughter spilling into the corners of my living room, I caught a glimpse of the journey we had traveled. The small discomfort of that first conversation felt like a stepping stone leading us into territory rich with understanding and connection. I realize now that our friendship isn't just about bringing food, it's about bringing ourselves into the open, flaws and all. As warm memories threaded together with laughter and late-night heart-to-hearts, I couldn't help but feel grateful for the bumps along the road. They had carved out this rhythm of authenticity in my life, reminding me that vulnerability isn't something to be feared, it's a bridge connecting us to one another in this beautifully messy thing we call life. And as I glanced over at her, her laughter mingling with the soft glow of the evening light, I felt a peace settle in. We had turned a once uncomfortable moment into a source of joy, building a deeper friendship around the table of shared experiences. This was not the end, but just the beginning of many meals to come. I still remember the night I got the call that changed everything. I was sprawled out on my couch, munching on cold pizza and trying to binge-watch a series I had been neglecting. Suddenly, my phone buzzed with my brother Alex's name lighting up the screen, and I paused, shoving a slice aside to answer. He sounded frantic. His dog, Max, had swallowed a toy and was in serious trouble. The vet bills were going to be astronomical, and Alex, who always seemed to live paycheck to paycheck, was in panic mode. I could hear Max whimpering faintly in the background, but what struck me most was the desperation in Alex's voice. He said he'd do anything to save him. Then came the awkward but necessary reminder of the $7,000 I had received as a reimbursement for a recent trip, money that I had earmarked for a much-needed down payment on a car. That dream felt so close, and yet here was my brother, my only family, pleading for help. "I don't know what to do, I can't afford this, please, I'll pay you back," he begged, and I could practically hear Max's tiny heart racing in my imagination. I felt torn apart. I pictured myself in Alex's shoes, drowning in worry, and how helpless I'd feel without the means to help Max. But that money wasn't just meant for my car, it represented stability and independence. With my heart heavy, I said, "Okay, I'll help, but you have to promise to pay me back." The relief in his voice was palpable, but it left me with a knot in my stomach because I knew I was setting aside my own needs, yet another instance of playing the role of the responsible sibling. A month later, I received a text that Alex's vet bills had exceeded my original offer. The more I sat with this, the more my anxiety grew. I had scrimped and saved to take that trip and had budgeted every cent meticulously, only to consider forking it over to Alex without any clear path back to my own goals. When I pressed him for repayment guarantees, he just got defensive. "You don't understand, Claire. This is about saving a life." I was a mix of frustration and guilt, feeling like he was weaponizing Max's health against me. It didn't help that Max had surgery, he was doing better, but I was still financially adrift, and my own bills were piling up. I started to withdraw, hesitating to reach out to my brother, fearing he might expect more from me. Our conversations became strained, every message loaded with unspoken tension. I felt like a villain for wanting my financial security but also a fool for not stepping up more. AITA for not just giving this up? I want to support him, but how can I? I contemplated, sitting on the edge of a precursory decision, my emotions tangled up like a knot I couldn't quite untie. Every day felt like a weigh-in, balancing my love for my brother against my needs. I finally reached out, heart pounding, and we talked it out. He reiterated how grateful he was but made me realize he needed to own his responsibilities, too. In that moment of raw honesty, we both recognized that familial bonds shouldn't be measured in money. We found a way forward, adjusting his payments while developing new understandings of our roles. It's been a month since our conversation, and though Alex still hasn't fully paid me back, I can feel the shift in our dynamic. We're more communicative now, working together on building that sibling bond while slowly repairing our financial strains. I'm still working toward my car and letting go of that guilt that weighed so heavy on my shoulders. As for Max, he seems to be thriving, wagging his tail more than ever, and honestly, the sight of him bouncing around has been worth every unspent dollar. Life goes on, and so do we. I never thought that a dog could teach humans so much about resilience and love, but here we are. Sitting in my living room on a rainy Saturday morning, I watch Max sprawled out on the couch, belly up, legs splayed like he owns the place. His existence has brought this unexpected joy into our lives, a bright spot amid the turbulent waters we've been navigating. As I sip my coffee, I think back to where it all started, the phone call from Alex that threw our family finances into disarray. At first, it felt like a betrayal when he asked me for the money I had reimbursed for our trip. $7,000 was no small amount, especially when it had been earmarked for my car payments. But the moment he voiced his concern about Max's health, suddenly I wasn't just considering my expenses, I was wrestling with the moral weight of my decision. Was I being selfish for holding on to what was technically mine, even if it could help save a life? That hum of internal conflict lingered for days. I remember pacing my apartment late at night, phone in hand, my mind racing with thoughts of Alex's mounting vet bills and the reality of Max's situation, a mix of concern for my brother and the loyalty I felt toward my own responsibilities. Our late-night conversations grew more profound, more vulnerable. I started understanding that Alex wasn't just my brother but also a guy who felt trapped, scared, and desperately in love with his dog. It shifted something in our relationship. My decision not to transfer that money immediately felt like an anchor in this new, tumultuous sea we were sailing. Over time, as I slowly began to find my footing again through little jobs and gig opportunities, I'd worked out a plan to address my own financial concerns without abandoning him completely. I agreed to help him with a fraction of the costs because I knew that Max's well-being weighed heavier on his heart than any financial burden I was carrying. Then there was that one Saturday morning after Alex had worked late into the night just to bring in some extra cash. I could see the exhaustion drawn on his face. I made us both a hearty breakfast, scrambled eggs with toast and avocado, and set it on the kitchen table. The smell of the coffee brewing and the sizzle of the eggs seemed to wake him from a stupor, and as he sat down, I could feel the tension easing between us a little more. "You didn't have to do this," he said, rubbing his eyes. "I'm fine managing on my own, you know." "Yeah, but I think we both need this," I replied, feeling the warmth of our moment. That morning felt different. As we shared stories about our childhood, about fights over whether we were going to eat cereal or a sandwich for dinner, that affectionate banter we held so dear, I noticed our walls were coming down. I could see how much he cared about Max, and I was easing into my own role of support rather than a reluctant benefactor. By now, it was clear that our relationship was morphing. Thanks to late-night chats, hearty breakfasts, and those small decisions to be there for each other, I could finally release the tension built up from those days of resentment and guilt. As the weeks rolled on, I found that seeing Max bounce around with energy made the guilt of not having my car more bearable. Each evening, I would join Alex on walks with Max, enjoying the fresh air. We'd talk about silly things, music, movies, and his latest attempts at becoming a TikTok sensation. I never imagined the world of dog stardom could be so competitive, but seeing him get more animated discussing it lifted my spirits. And sure, things aren't perfect yet. There are still disagreements about finances and the lingering edge of unfulfilled expectations regarding repayment, but we're working through it together. It's less of a transaction and more about reconnecting. We're nurturing our connection instead of guarding our pockets. I still want my car, and I still don't have all my ducks in a row financially, but I've come to realize that there's something more valuable in these moments with Alex and Max. Life is messy, and sometimes we end up in these tangled webs, but as I stare at Max now, I recognize that we're all figuring it out in our own time, one paw, $1, and one fragile bond at a time. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow across the living room where I sat with Alex, both of us fully enveloped in a narrative that was still very much in progress. Max, his soft golden fur catching the light just right, lay sprawled on the floor, blissfully unaware of the intricacies of human transactions and expectations. The vigor with which he played with his squeaky toy felt like an innocently perfect metaphor for the simplicity we all sometimes overlook. It was moments like this that made me realize how worth it was to prioritize relationships over finances, no matter how tempting it was to cling to the cold, hard numbers that dictated our realities. I glanced at Alex, who was focused on his phone, probably debating whether to text the veterinary clinic about Max's follow-up appointment. There was a new tenderness to our interactions. The shadows of previous conversations no longer seemed to linger like an unwelcome cloud above us. Instead, they were softer now, like hints of rain, bringing life to dry earth. "Hey," I said, breaking through his concentration. "You know I'm proud of you, right? For making decisions that are best for Max." He looked up, surprise flickering across his face momentarily before his features settled into an almost shy smile. "Yeah? Thanks," he replied, rubbing the back of his neck, a young habit he hadn't outgrown. "Sometimes it feels like I'm just flailing around," I chuckled, shaking my head. "We all are. And flailing is totally okay. Just means we're trying." The energy in the room shifted again, a sort of understanding settling in the space around us. It was a reminder of our childhood days, silly but honest adventures where flailing often resulted in laughter. With each conversation, we shared not only the events of our days but also our vulnerabilities, our doubts. I found solace in sharing my worries about my finances. Sometimes I would even admit my lingering desires for that car while Alex voiced his fears about the vet bills piling up and how they would affect his already meager budget. Yet, there we were, two adults learning that money isn't the core of our bond but merely a side note. As if on cue, Max leapt up, capturing our attention as he chased his toy across the room, skidding slightly as he turned a corner too quickly. "Super dog," I shouted playfully and tossed his ball toward the kitchen. His excitement was infectious, and for a few moments, we watched him, both of us chuckling at the silliness of it all. It wasn't lost on me how Max had somehow tethered us back together in a way that money never could. He was family, and sustaining him meant nourishing our relationship too. There was still a long road ahead. I could feel the weight of unfulfilled promises and unpaid bills lingering, but each day of shared responsibilities felt like a little victory. I had let go of the need to keep precise accounts between us. Our relationship was worth more than dollar signs. Instead, I focused on being there when Alex called for moral support and being flexible when it came to managing my own financial expectations. Weeks went by and the dynamic continued to shift from necessity to genuine connection. Sometimes, while Alex was working late or volunteering with Max at the local shelter, I'd steal moments for myself, negotiating my own budgets, trying to find a way to carve out a new sense of financial independence. Instead of pressuring myself to rebalance the scales, I began to find joy in little luxuries, a fancy coffee after a long day or a new book to immerse myself in. It wasn't about recklessness but rather a practice in nurturing my own happiness alongside my obligations to my brother and his dog. One evening, sprawled comfortably on the couch, Alex and I watched an old movie together, the kind that stretched between dramas and comedies, filled with awkward pauses and inopportune moments. Max was nestled between us, snoring softly as we munched on popcorn. I felt a serene sense of contentment washing over me. It struck me that the burdens I thought were too heavy to carry were lightened even just by sharing the journey with someone else. I didn't know if I would ever get that car, and honestly, it started to feel relatively trivial against the backdrop of healing that was happening. Each time I saw Max bounded around, or caught a glimpse of Alex's genuine laughter, I recognized that the recalibration of our lives didn't need to revolve around a reimbursement of $7,000 after all. As the credits rolled and the room was filled with warmth from the setting sun, I smiled, grateful for both the challenges and the small victories that continually reshaped my understanding of family and commitment. Whatever came next, be it car ownership or new financial goals, would ultimately be secondary to the connections made, patched up, and reinforced through this journey of shared learning, love, and, of course, one wagging tail at a time. I never thought I'd find myself in a situation where I'd be questioning if I was the asshole for not reminding my fiancée that stoves are hot, but here we are. It was one of those typical Sunday afternoons, the kind where the sun spills in through the kitchen window, taunting me with warmth while I stood at the cluttered counter, trying to whip up something decent for dinner. I was juggling ingredients and listening to my fiancé, Tom, talk about his day, his voice fading in and out as I focused on slicing vegetables. Tom is the kind of guy who's enticed by a good recipe, except that he hasn't quite grasped the unspoken rules of culinary safety, specifically when it comes to the stove. It might sound petty, but I really thought he was old enough to know better. We've lived together for almost 3 years, and I've certainly burned myself enough times to have learned to be careful. I could feel the heat wafting from the burners, and as I glanced over my shoulder, I saw Tom standing too close to the stove, engrossed in a video on his phone about some gaming news. I remember thinking, he knows stoves are hot. My heart sank when I heard a sudden hiss, the sound of bacon grease meeting an exposed burner. In a split second, he pulled his hand back from the hot pan, yelping as he danced back like a toddler who just discovered a sea of lava. The moment felt like it unfolded in slow motion, the shock on his face, the way he shook his hand in disbelief, and the acrid smell of scorched skin starting to mingle with the savory aroma of dinner. I rushed over, my heart racing, both embarrassment and guilt seeping through me as I skated between irritation and concern. I mean, I knew I should have said something, right? But part of me thought he'd get it by now. Later that night, while I was dabbing ointment on his blistered skin, I tried to tease it away, saying something like, "You know, I did think about reminding you." Tom laughed, but it was that half-hearted kind of laugh, the one that told me he wasn't really finding it funny. "Maybe next time, you could actually remind me," he shot back, a playful spark in his eyes, but the undercurrent of annoyance was unmistakable. I grumbled something about how I didn't want to treat him like a kid who needed constant supervision, but deep down, I felt that creeping sense of guilt. Was I supposed to remind him about everything? A part of me wanted him to figure it out, to learn through his own mistakes. But I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe I had failed him somehow. Getting into bed that night, I stared at the ceiling, the shadows whispering my doubts back to me. Am I the asshole for letting him learn this lesson the hard way, or should I have recognized the potential for disaster before it even happened? The thoughts spiraled in my head. I felt exhausted. Should I have coddled him, or does that just breed dependency? Days turned into weeks, and while Tom's burn healed, the tension felt unresolved. I would catch him stealing glances at the stove, then avoiding it like it was the plague. I could see he was frustrated with himself, and sometimes I wondered if I needed to provide that level of reassurance he sought. Maybe it was the kids' show we just binge-watched, but there was something unsettling about waiting for him to catch fire literally or figuratively. Eventually, I brought it up during a quiet lunch date. "You know, I didn't mean to imply I wouldn't remind you. I just thought you'd know on your own." I barely recognized the nervousness creeping into my own voice. Tom looked at me, his brow furrowed like he was struggling to figure something out. I guess I thought that too, but I still end up doing dumb stuff. It's like walking into a wall when you're distracted. His vulnerability caught me by surprise. We ended up sharing a laugh, easing the tension between us as we agreed maybe a reminder every now and then wouldn't hurt. It wasn't about being infantilized, but more about nurturing each other as we learned together. That felt like a step toward a stronger partnership, and as we cleaned up those last few moments together, I realized it wasn't about who was right or wrong, it was about how we navigated through those moments as one. So, was I the asshole? Maybe, but we had each owned our share of the lesson, and in the end, we grew a little closer because of it. As I washed the last pot, the warmth of those shared moments lingered in the air like the scent of garlic and thyme we'd used in our dinner. The lessons from the evening, those little nudges toward a deeper understanding, felt more sacred than the burned skin that would heal in time. I glanced over at Alex, carefully drying the plates, his brow furrowed in concentration. I recalled the tension from earlier, The thick silence that had filled our small kitchen when I could see the anger flash in his eyes after he accidentally brushed against the stove. I had been brushing my own hands against my apron, fully aware of the burn risk and completely unprepared for the sudden frustration that erupted between us. "Why didn't you say anything?" he had snapped, his voice sharp and raw, filled with that mix of hurt and defensiveness that only surfaces when you feel vulnerable. I winced at the memory, the way his words had cut through the air, as much of a burn as the one on his wrist. But here we were now, laughter creeping back as we joked about the overly ambitious meal I'd tried to prepare. "Next time, we just order pizza," I smirked, nudging his side playfully with my hip, and the tension melted a bit more. Because the truth was, I had worried about reminding him of the obvious. I had felt like a schoolteacher, a role neither of us wanted to slip into. I breathed in deeply, letting the scent of the soap and water soothe away the earlier unease. With every dish placed in its rightful cabinet, I was reminded that love isn't just about the beautiful moments, it's also about navigating the bumps and bruises together. That kind of partnership required a blend of trust and patience, where we could admit our faults without fear of being judged as incompetent. When he turned to me and offered a slight smile, I felt a pang of gratitude wash over me. "You know," he said softly, "I appreciate you. I don't always think about the obvious stuff, and sometimes I might even think I'm above reminders." I nodded, the words hanging between us like a delicate thread, as we stood in our imperfect kitchen doing our best to create a life together. "I'm here to remind you, but I won't make it a habit to be your alarm," I teased, and we both chuckled, relief flooding back in as I felt the weight of the day lift ever so slightly. I knew we'd have our share of misunderstandings, but maybe there was beauty in that chaos too. Would I be the perfect partner? Not a chance. But would I be there, paddling alongside him as we both tried to find our balance? Absolutely. And as we finally finished up, I glanced at the stove, still off, thankfully, and wondered how many more lessons waited for us in the future. It felt oddly comforting, this path we were carving out, uncertain yet ours. Maybe I did have some faults, but those didn't define our journey together, they merely added depth to it, guiding us toward the next meal, metaphorically and literally. That evening lingered in the air, a strange mix of tension and relief, both of us grappling with the warmth of the kitchen that had witnessed our little storm. As I washed the last dish, bubbles rising and popping in the soapy water, I felt Jacob's presence just behind me, his breath steady and comforting. "I'm really sorry about earlier," he said, his voice softer than I had heard in a while. "I hate that it escalated like that." I turned, meeting his gaze, and saw a flicker of vulnerability there. "I get it, we're both learning," I replied, trying to convey that I understood it wasn't just him. He offered a half smile, and something about it reminded me of all the shared moments we'd had, not just the disagreements. The late-night ice cream runs, the spontaneous kitchen dance parties, and even the marathon binge-watching sessions that sometimes turned into long conversations about our dreams. "I guess we're still growing together," he murmured, and his words set off a sweet flood of recognition in me. It was so easy to focus on the stormy parts of our relationship, but here we were, carving out our space to be imperfect together. I wiped my hands dry and took a moment to really look at him, the way his brow furrowed in thought, the way he absently tucked a loose curl behind his ear. "And we can remind each other about the hot stove, right?" I teased lightly, trying to bring back the levity we both needed. He laughed, a genuine, bright laugh that still echoed in the corners of the room, and I felt the tension fade a little more. "Deal. Just promise you'll remind me about the knives too, I'm the one always cutting myself," he joked back, and it felt like we had just forged an unspoken pact. We began packing away the leftover ingredients, and as I handed him a container, our fingers brushed, igniting an electric sweetness that sent a shiver down my spine. Moments like these felt more nourishing than the food we were preparing. I think it was in our shared laughter, our playful nudges against each other, and the small, everyday acknowledgments where quiet love really resided. Later, as we settled onto the couch, plates of dinner resting on our laps, I could hear the comforting hum of the world outside. The window was slightly ajar, letting in the cool evening breeze, and I felt alive in that moment, aware of how easily things could slip back into chaos. "What if we make a habit out of cooking together? Like a weekly thing?" I proposed, and Jacob pondered. "Yeah, that sounds great. But we should probably write down a safety checklist first," he joked again, his playful approach making it easier to imagine our future kitchen escapades. So, we started mapping out our weeks over dinner, Tuesday taco nights, Friday pizza parties. It felt like a plan to fortify ourselves against future mishaps. All the while, I noticed the way his excitement bubbled through, and I couldn't help but smile at how far we'd come in just that one day. As we leaned over the table, tracing a layout of ingredients and ideas, I was struck by a thought. Life would never stop throwing challenges our way, but maybe, just maybe, those very challenges were what would draw us closer. And so, as we settled into the couch's plush embrace, my heart brimmed with hope. Lessons would come, and sometimes they might burn, just like that stove. But I knew we'd learn to navigate it together, to build our little fortress of understanding and compassion, one dish at a time. The beauty of partnership is not about being flawless, it's about embracing our imperfections and finding joy in the space between.